Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Great to see you all. I'm Andy Craig. I'm the chair of the South East Coastal Group, and I'll be chairing the day today. I think, well, who's he? Where's he come from? Well, as I say, I chair the South East Coastal Group, but I work for the Environment Agency in the as the coastal engineer for Kent. Just before we start, just a few housekeeping bits and pieces for the day. We're not expecting any fire alarms today, so if it does go, it will be the real thing. And the exits are the two doors each side of the room there. And we need to muster back towards the car park behind me. For those who haven't found the toilets, they're through the door at the back, gents to the left, ladies to the right. Today's meeting is a hybrid meeting, so we've got people online as well. And the meeting will be recorded. There'll be tea and coffee available in the breaks, as we've already had this morning, and lunch will be served between 1 and 2 o'clock. So there's a few bits of housekeeping. So for today, yes, I feel very honoured to be here again. At the South East Regional Coastal Monitoring Programme Annual Partners Meeting. I was fortunate to do it last year at Herne Bay. We was in the east of the area last year, right over in East Kent, and we're in Worthing this year, and a great turnout. As I say, feel very honoured to be here and talking about such a fantastic programme that we've had. Been running for 22 years now. And the wealth of data that we have that is just so important to the everyday work that we do in managing our beaches and frontages. A really valuable programme that, as the total of myself as the South East Coastal Group Chair, and certainly the wider group as well. I'm not going to talk anymore. I'm going to go straight in. So we're going to look at our first session this morning. Will take us up to 11:15. We'll be hearing from Thomas from the CCO. He's going to give us an update on the programme. We'll be hearing from Hayley Cousins from the CCO, who's going to be talking about the asset register update. And then from Elizabeth, who's going to be talking about hydrodynamics. And then Samuel will take us up to our first coffee break, who's going to talk about updates to the Coastal Monitoring website. So I'll ask Thomas to take to the stage.
I do have the lapel. Okay, can everyone hear me? Yep. Okay. Well, also a very warm welcome from myself. I'm Thomas. I'm the program manager of the Southeast Regional Coastal Monitoring Programme. The program update is on behalf of myself and Charlie Thompson. Unfortunately, Charlie can't be here today. She's busy actually still preparing the business case. Next week, there's a pre-meeting arranged with LPRG, who will be reviewing our business case. That has only recently come up, so she's very busy at the moment, taking on board all of the comments and reviews that we've been providing her of the business case. And I'll touch on that a little bit later near the end of my presentation. Okay, but I will start with the general program update. I split my presentation into 4 sections this year, starting off with our core delivery updates, moving on to some modernization and innovation we've introduced over the last 12 months. A little heading on technical advice, which is not something we talk about very often, but we've done quite a bit of it, and it is something that is increasing. So I thought it was worth a mention this year as well. And then a lot of what we have been doing is looking ahead for the next phase and preparation of our business case, so I'll touch on that as well. But starting off with our core delivery, this is a little sneak peek of the 2025 aerial photography that is on its way. Can anybody guess where this is on the coastline? Yes, Matt. It is indeed Calshot. So you can see Calshot Castle there, you can see the slipway there, and this here is Calshot Stockpile, which is a lovely bit of monitoring that we do. See if we can go there. And of course, monitoring the stockpile is part of our topographic beach surveys. Over the last 12 months, we've carried out 206 beach surveys along the southeast coastline. And you might think, after 206 surveys, doing that for 20 years on end, that might become repetitive or boring. But Paul here is adequately demonstrating that we still need to put in quite a bit of creativity to adequately capture the beach. This is Paul positioning a laser scanner on the groin at Milford so we can capture both bays, and is very adequately hiding himself in the shadow of the laser scanner so he's not included in the point cloud. Of those 206 surveys, 85 were baseline surveys, and 103 of those were profile surveys. We also conducted 18 call-off surveys, so just a general reminder, we are available for pre-works, post-works, and post-storm event surveys. And we're basically doing a couple of custom deliveries as well. This is a point cloud at Sandsfoot. This is Sandsfoot Cliff, with on top of it, Sandsfoot Castle. This is near Weymouth. And the cliff is essentially retreating, and it's taking the castle with it. You can actually see a bit of castle has fallen off here. And this monitoring is for Dorset Council, monitoring the retreat of the cliff. We're also monitoring the Wareham Channel in Poole Bay on behalf of the Environment Agency. We're doing that using single beam, and that is part of the realignment program that is happening there. And we are also monitoring the fence removal, so the beach after the fences were removed at Middle Beach, and that's on behalf of the National Trust. Moving on to delivery of our LiDAR. This is a little sample of our LiDAR collection from winter 24-25. Any guesses where along the coastline this is? It is indeed Sheerness. So this triangle here, this is Bluetown in Sheerness, this sort of historic port town. And this here is the Criterion, which is a lovely building, which is the place where the last in-person Southeast Coastal Group was held. It was held in this room. It's one of these lovely rooms that you can sit in happily for a couple of hours. Keep staring at the walls and you will find new interesting things to stare at. And during that day, we also went on a feed trip just down the road to Marine Parade, where you have the fences that look like this, which are currently coming up for renewal by the Environment Agency. And it was just a really sort of sharp and good reminder of sort of different types of assets that are out there, and the sort of ways that people live already when we think about things like adaptation going forward. Going back onto the LiDAR delivery. So we had our 2024-25 winter capture between Gravesend and Brighton. That is 406 square kilometers. That was quality controlled and uploaded to the Coastal Monitoring website. Currently, the collection is ongoing between Portland Bill and Brighton. 55 out of 500 square kilometers has been collected so far, which is about 11% of the total survey area. Moving on to our hydrographic data collection. This bit of collection here in the East Solent is about 87 square kilometers. That was actually captured the summer before last, but the data was not made available on the Coastal Monitoring website until the end of last year. But that is now fully available as well. And we collected part of that survey in-house as well on our own survey boat, Zephyr, and all of that data is, of course, also all available. They meet the same specification. They both meet Order 1A specification. We've also added 7 square kilometers to our in-house collection efforts in Christchurch Bay and the West Solent. That is that area in yellow here, and the orange bits here is what is outstanding, and is our aim to collect by the end of this phase. And then finally, Channel Surveys for us also did a survey of Swanage Bay. And this is a sample from that survey. We also have the backscatter for that survey, which we are currently using to produce seabed mapping on behalf of Dorset Council again. Moving on to aerial photography. Over the summer, we captured 971 square kilometers of aerial photography. Some concessions had to be made to the specification for this round of aerial captures, in particular around the Sandown area and the Seven Sisters to Cockmere area. We will review all of that data as it comes in for quality control. Should the data really be severely out of specification, no longer serve its purpose, then there's always the opportunity to recapture again in spring, but hopefully we'll still be okay. There is an updated delivery timeline for that data set as well, which is now April of 2026. Okay, our hydrodynamics, our wave buoys, tide gauges, and meteorological stations. I've put a couple of really big numbers up there, which is the number of days and number of individual data records that were basically passed through and quality controlled by CCO since January of this year, really. So about 210,000 wave records, 367,000 tide records, and 473,000 met records came through CCO, were QC'd and uploaded to the website. But of course, that's an effort that we do for the national network as well. So in reality, those numbers are even bigger. Over 600,000 wave records, 600,000 tide records, and over 1.1 million met records have come through CCO, have been QC'd, and are available on the website from the last year alone. Of course, data quality is what is most important to us. Below here, we have some tables showing the wave buoys, tide gauges, and met stations. We aim for a recovery rate of at least 95% for all of our instrumentation, and everything that is showing up here in green has met that threshold. And you can see at almost all of our instrumentation that is the case. There are two outliers here when it comes to our tide gauges, and Lizzie is going to explain to you exactly why that is. The picture I've put on this slide is of the redeployment of the buoy at Bracklesham Bay on the 24th of July of 2025. And I say redeployment because, unfortunately, a couple of days earlier, the buoy had a rather unfortunate encounter with the groin at Bunleasure and Medmarie, and it did not walk away unscathed. In fact, it was a total loss, but at CCO, we tried to have nothing go to waste. So our maintenance contractor, Fugro, was kind enough to excavate the heart of the wave buoy, which is the HIPPY sensor. That is the sensor that actually measures the accelerations and then converts them into wave measurements. And that sensor landed on my workbench at home. And after a weekend of a bit of elbow grease, a bit of dismantling, putting things back together, that is what the sensor looks like now, and we have it in our office. And it's just a really lovely physical tactile piece to show people how measurements are actually done, how wave measurements are done, which is useful because wave measurements can sometimes be a little bit abstract to explain. Moving on to the delivery of assets. This is something that Hayley is going to talk to you about a lot more, so I'm just going to give you some headline numbers for this service. For the Southeast Register alone, we currently have 8,349 assets included in the register. Of those, 4,879 have an inspection with a condition grade. And we have an additional 2,293 assets on the way, which have been inspected between Gravesend and Eastbourne by JBA. That data is currently being QC'd and will be available on the register within the next couple of weeks to months. And then finally, we are out for inspection, or we are out for a tender for inspections for the final bit of coastline between Eastbourne and Portland, which will add an additional 1,390 assets to the register. That will complete the RMA baseline along the entire southeast coastline. And we're aiming to have all of that data available by March of 2027. How we will move forward is that for every stretch of coastline, every other year, we will do a gap analysis, which will include looking at what data is available for that stretch of coastline. Does that data, is it of good quality? Does it have a condition grade? And is it less than 2 years old? If it meets all of those criteria, we can exclude it from our collection efforts. If it doesn't, we will include it. And we will also consult with the local RMA to, of course, make sure that we incorporate all available data. And in that way, we can basically scale with the RMA's own efforts to collect their asset inspections. If they inspect more, that's good news for us. We need to inspect less. If they're inspecting less, we will include it in our own efforts. Okay, moving on to a bit of modernization and innovation, starting out with our partners at Worthing Borough Council. For the longest time now, Worthing has used a mobile laser scanner mounted on a quad bike to do their surveys, and they've swapped out that system this year with a new Regal YM-V1 mobile laser scanner. This device collects 100,000 points per second, and that's on its lowest setting. And with a big point cloud like that comes a lot of cleaning efforts and a lot of manual labor. So Worthing has been engaging with a company called Pointly AI to develop a AI point classification methodology system algorithm, which is helping them automatically classify features on the beach. Those classifications can be groins, people, vegetation, buildings, boats. And the idea is you can then automatically remove all of those features at once in the cleaning process. Also, Canterbury City Council is modernizing, and they're in the final phases of acquiring a DJI Matrice M400 drone equipped with an L2 or perhaps L3 if it is available at the time of purchase system. Now, this system collects 240,000 points per second, but it's not a competition. But DANS, if you cramped it up to the maximum, can actually collect 300,000 points per second. So there is that. Okay, so this system can collect a survey of about 2.5 square kilometers in a single flight with a flight time of 59 minutes, but that is absolutely under ideal non-windy conditions. A little bit of innovation then, starting off with a long-standing service of Hydrodynamics and our long-standing monthly QC of that data. We've added a very small additional layer to that monthly QC effort, which is a QC in particular of the buoy position. This is a map of the buoy at Pevensey Bay, and you can see, if you look closely, a black and blue circle there, and that is the watch circle of the buoy, and 99.9 positions of the buoy sit within that circle, and that's exactly where the buoy should be when it's doing its measurements. Those stretches of points, these arms that come out here in red, those are basically adrift events. So this is showing all historical positions where the buoy has been over its lifetime. And all of these positions were previously QC'd out. They were assigned a flag, either flag 1 if it was bad data, or flag 7 if it was good data, but the buoy was actually adrift. But what we also started to find, very occasionally, is an odd point here and there. And that was during the regular QC where the buoy should have been on position. So to combat that, we now have a monthly check on this as well to make sure that these stragglers are also removed from the time series. We've also introduced API endpoints for our tide predictions, and Lizzie is going to cover those. And we now provide wave spectra on the real-time data pages from data that has reached us via the Iridium satellite network. So as you may know, we have 2 communication pathways for our wave data from wave buoys. One of them is via HF radio. We have an antenna on the buoy, an antenna on a shore station with a radio link in between, and from there, the data is uploaded onto the website. That's standard for us, but we have a couple of buoys that work on Iridium as well. So they communicate their data via the Iridium satellite network, so it basically goes direct onto the website, direct onto the server. But that data is slightly different in several ways, and that difference meant that we could not display the wave spectra on the real-time pages of the website, but now we've built the capability to do that as well. Okay, this is actually a very old piece of work that we have sort of blown new life into. A storm calendar has been available on the website since 2018. It's sort of a byproduct of a paper that Travis and I wrote back in 2018 on spatial footprints and duration of storm events along the English coastline. But in all honesty, the calendar we made available then hasn't really been updated since 2018. And that's because it was very labor intensive and very manual to update it. That calendar consists out of a map, which shows the spatial footprint of the event, and a storm track. So we've revamped that, and it provides a little bit more information this time. It provides still information on wave height extremity, on the coincidence of storm peak and high water, and also on the tidal cycle, meaning on whether the storm happens during the lowest neaps, the highest springs, or any tidal stage in between. We now have a semi-automated workflow for that, basically entirely using our own APIs and the ERA5 mean sea level pressure gridded data sets. I put almost behind there because we also make use of the National Tide Gauge's tide data, and we do still need to go and pick that up manually, but we are almost there with our automated process. And these maps are now produced 5 days post-event because the ERA 5 data has a 5-day embargo on it. And then we have a spin-off of a spin-off, essentially. Based on the work that we did to revamp the storm calendar, we've produced a sort of survey planning calendar, I guess we can call it, where what this is showing on the x-axis here is the days of the month, 1 to 31, and then here we have the months of the year. So each individual cell is a day in the year. Each one of these cells has a number in it. That's a number between 20 and 120. And that number represents the tidal range during that day. So on very low neap tides, the number will be very low. On very high spring tides, the number will be very high. And then we've colored this grid based on the value of the number. And you can immediately see the sort of cycles of springs and neaps throughout the year becoming apparent. So that's already quite useful. You can quickly see where your springs and neaps are. But then we added an additional layer of information on top of that, which we derive from NOAA's sunrise and sunset calculator, which also means that we now color the numbers in green or red. And if a color is green, that means that the low water is actually happening during daylight hours. So it makes for an easy shift to look at the red ones to see those are actually tides that might be good, but they're not available to us because the low water is not during daylight hours. This specific calendar is for Sandown. It has been used by Poppy. I've had some good feedback on it, which is very nice to hear. And then another bit of innovation has been sort of pushed forward by Geodata, who you will hear from later this afternoon during Jason's presentation, which is an AI-driven wave forecast at Milford trained on the buoy data from Milford. The forecast comes from an XGBoost model trained on the data from Milford. And what was essentially delivered during this, what is really a pilot project, is a proof of concept. We can see one output here on the bottom right, where in the black solid line, we have the actual HS measurement. And in the dotted blue line, we have a predicted significant wave height measurement. And it's doing pretty well. So it seems to be doing all right, but we also sort of highlighted a number of limitations that, in all fairness, Jason and his team have combated already quite a bit. More from that by Jason this afternoon. Okay, and something that we don't touch on very often is the technical advice that we provide on request. And over the last year, we've been doing quite a bit of that. And we've seen over the last couple of years that this has really ramped up for us as a monitoring program. And really, we're providing that technical advice at 3 different spatial scales, at the regional, national, and international level. And I should emphasize here that CCO provides independent, evidence-based technical advice. So that means that we have no opinion on strategies, strategy pathways, whether beach nourishment should take place, or any of those things. But what we can provide is the data to do the analysis. We can provide some of that analysis, and we can evaluate some of that analysis that is delivered to you as well. So on a regional scale, we've been involved in the EA Hurst Delimiting strategy, where we informed the model boundaries, and we reviewed the model outputs. We're currently undertaking a scoping study for Sussex IFCA, where we are leading the design of a seabed mapping habitat baseline for the Sussex offshore area. On a national level, then, we were involved with DEFRA remote sensing deep dives, where we advised on operational applications of Earth observation for EFSTR monitoring, satellites, essentially. We also made an assessment of the EA coastal flood boundary data set that was funded by SCOPAC and was done for the SCOPAC area, where we compared the modeled return levels from the data set against the observation data from our own tide gauges, but also the national tide gauges. We're also an active member of the steering group of the EA Joint Probability Guidance Update, and we've been advising quite heavily on the wave monitoring rollout of our colleagues at SEPA, the Scottish Environment Protection Agency, which is very nice to see that that is being rolled out. On an international level, then, this is fairly new. Over the last couple of weeks, we were invited by NOOS, the Northwest European Shelf Operational Oceanography System. It's quite a mouthful, where we contributed to observation systems knowledge and exchange. What we really presented there was our wave buoy strategy that I will touch on later on, but Lizzie will go into significantly more depth on that. And then finally, we were also invited to present at the European Space Agency State Climate Change Initiative, their annual meeting, where we were brought in to advise on using buoy data for satellite altimeter validation and calibration. And then the last bit of my presentation, I'll focus on our preparations for phase 4, which in all honesty is what has occupied a lot of our mind space over the last 12 months. Sort of put a national picture on here, so sort of a reminder that a lot of what I will present now sort of holds for the entire national network. I've chosen a picture at night because it just really nicely highlights just how densely populated our coastlines, and particularly here in the southeast with the variety there we actually have. So last year, I mentioned that we were putting in a lot of effort into creating a competitive environment for our tenders for the next phase. That was sort of a year-long effort that culminated in our contractor day at the National Oceanography Center. So during that contractor day, we tried to bring together as many consultants and contractors as we could to try to basically sell them on the program for them to join our procurement framework. So we had 50 attendees at the day. During the day, we walked them through an overview of the RCMP. We presented the upcoming works, and we introduced them to our dynamic purchasing system, which is our procurement framework. Then we also tried to win some hearts and minds, and we should thank Coastal Partners here, who gave a really nice presentation on the use of coastal monitoring data for very practical things like beach renourishment, beach management, scheme development, etc. And we also tried to win some hearts with Professor Ivan Hague from the University of Southampton coming in to present on some climate change research and the way that our data feeds into that as well. And we ended the day with a site visit to Hurst Spit. So a big thank you to Pete in the room for facilitating that as well. So we did some evaluation after that event to see whether it was worthwhile doing and potentially worthwhile repeating. So we sent out a questionnaire which had a lot of respondents. I think over half of attendees responded. And 95% of them found the event insightful and valuable, and 89% said they would attend again. We also got positive feedback on networking and visibility of future tenders, and there was a strong appreciation of the opportunity to have direct engagement with the CCO team, but also the other regional teams that attended as well. So that was very positive to hear as well, that contractors seem to have got something positive out of it. Okay, something that has been quite an undertaking over the last couple of months is our Wavebuoy long-term strategy. As I mentioned, Lizzie is going to cover this in depth, so I'm just going to give you some highlights here. We are exploring how we can make the national coastal Wavebuoy network more resilient, efficient, and sustainable while maintaining our data quality and, importantly, continuity. What we are essentially doing is we are assessing the feasibility of transitioning from HF radio signal, as I mentioned before, radio comms between buoy and a shore station, to 4G and 5G comms, which would eliminate the need for a shore station. We are building statistical data sets to evaluate whether we can extend service intervals, and we are investigating battery use efficiencies as well. What we've done so far is we've basically established that the technology works, and it's a mature technology. We did that together with DataWell. And we are in the process of basically mapping mobile coverage on a national scale to make sure that we actually have coverage at our Wavebuoy locations. And some of the early statistical evidence indicates that about 60% of our buoys, that's nationwide, operate over a year without issue. If we look at the Southeast in particular, that number goes up to 72% of our buoys operate without issue for over a year. So that's quite good. And that's quite a solid footing to be on to say that we might be able to push into a year-long service interval, but at the same time, we've quantified the risk as well. Some of our motivators here is that 4G, 5G comms would mean a major hardware simplification for us for each site that we can introduce it at. It means potentially not having to host a shore station, not having a receiving antenna, not having a computer, not having a BT line, not having a DataWell receiver there. So it makes life a little bit easier. Reduced battery use and vessel trips. That won't only save on cost, but also lower the environmental impact. And it could really streamline our software and data delivery as well, as data delivery could come straight to CCO. Okay, and this is one of my final slides, which is on the big effort that is currently underway and the reason why Charlie unfortunately couldn't attend today, which is the outline business case, which of course is seeking to secure the long-term continuity of the national network, continuing to underpin SRM investments and to safeguard the national data sets that have been created over the last 20 years. So there's a number of options that the business case puts forward, but the leading option, the one that has the most cost benefit, will be a maintain plus adapt to changing circumstances option. Maintain being maintain the services that we currently deliver, and adapt via online data analysis and visualization pushed out through the national network website as well. We're putting that forward as a way to address a capacity gap that we have identified. I've sort of hinted at it when I was talking about the technical advice that we are increasingly providing, but we did a sort of systematic questionnaire of our stakeholders from the national monitoring program, and over 70% of our stakeholders reported lacking the in-house capability to process or interpret our monitoring data, which of course is somewhat concerning. And if we can step in to try to fill that gap, to do a little bit more of that online data analysis, visualize it, make that accessible to people, then that is something that we would like to explore.
Hi everyone, my name is Hayley Cousins, and today I'm going to talk to you about the Coastal Defence Asset Register. So here's just an overview of some national statistics. So before the National Asset Register was developed, there was a lot of different fragmented data sets from the EAMs and then all the local authority data. So the National Asset Register aims to bring all that together into a nice sort of clean data set. So it currently holds information on 21,435 assets. 12,694 of those are EA assets, and 8,741 are local authority. So in total, 20 local authorities have contributed data to the asset register, in addition to inspections carried out in-house by the South West Coastal Group on behalf of the local councils. So of the 21,000 assets that are currently there, there are 31,500 individual inspections from those, and 22.5 inspections contain condition grades. So that's about 70% of those assets have a complete data set, but it still leaves about 30 that are incomplete. So here's probably one of the most up-to-date views of the asset register. So this is a section of Milford-on-Sea, and you can select, so if you press the query layers there, you can just select one of them. So I've selected Groin 8, and it will bring up occasionally a nice little photo if there is one saved to the asset, but you'll get data like the asset reference, the asset type, the location, like the easting, northing, and depending on the access, you'll get the inspection grade as well. And the newest feature is probably the how-to guide. So you can go to the side and you get the how-to, and you'll get like a nice little video that will come up there, and it will tell you how to download the data and how to get the most out of it. You can access it straight from the map viewer that I'm sure most of you are familiar with. It's just a little tab to the side, or you can follow that link at the bottom, which is just the coastalmonitoring.org/assets. And about the asset download, so this is the last quarter, so July to September this year, generated a download value of 1.5 million. So we've got 172,000 of that coming from general asset details, so like the asset type and the asset reference and the location and stuff. And then we've got 12,000 generated from download of the elements, 1.4 million downloads from the inspections, and 1,220 pounds worth of photo downloads. And here's it split up nicely by region. So this is not normalized. If you read the count on the side and the data type along the bottom, there's a lot more photos in the southwest. I'm assuming it's a nice coastline. Lots of photos there. And this is just a breakdown of the data users. So we've got 400,000 coming from consultancies and 1.1 million downloads from local authorities and the EA. And if you compare that with downloads of other NNRCMP data, you can see we've got here terrestrial habitat mapping, seabed mapping reports, waves, LiDAR, orthophotography, bathymetry, and topographic surveys. You can see that there's a much larger proportion of other NNRCMP data being used for university research and other data users, whereas the asset data is being primarily downloaded by RMAs, which is really nice to see. And there's just a quick overview of some funding sources. So we've got 400,000 coming from other funding and 1.1 million from other government. And we move to our current contract that's underway that Thomas spoke briefly about. So the CCO has contracted JBA Consulting to do some asset inspections between the Isle of Grain and Eastbourne. So the gap analysis was conducted by pulling EAM's data and local authority data into GIS software and identifying any assets that hadn't previously been digitized, there was missing asset data. So we were specifically looking for asset condition grades, or that the data was older than 2 years. So once complete, this will add around 2,300 more assets to the southeast area. And once the QC is done on that data, we'll push it to the website as soon as possible. And that moves us to the current contract that's out for tender. So that's the ASO2 gap fill. So this is the other side of Eastbourne. This is Eastbourne to Portlandville. And we've got in blue there, so that's all the known assets that we've got. And then the orange is the contracted asset inspections that we'll include in the tender. So you can see there's quite a big gap around the Brighton to Arran frontage, and then the rest there is just sort of private assets. So we've got 1,390 assets in total in that contract. 900 of those are groins, 86 of them are walls, 37 pieces of engineered high ground, and 17 breakwaters. In addition to that, we'll also be doing some inspections in-house. So this is in the West Solent, sort of around between Calshot and Leap Country Park. And we'll be doing those in-house. So there's 327 assets there, 304 groins, 5 engineered high grounds, 2 outfalls, 2 piers, 2 promenades, 3 slipways, and 9 walls. So yeah, the assets here are either private or owned and maintained by Hampshire County Council. And by doing these in-house, we'll save an efficiency of about £18,000. To facilitate these in-house inspections, so T98 training has been organised for delegates from the CCO, North Yorkshire, Coastal Partners, BCP and Worthing. And once that training goes ahead, I think it's next week, we'll have a fleet of about 36 asset inspectors across the southeast. And that'll really help with doing more in-house inspections and establishing more future efficiencies. And just to finish up with some upcoming asset register updates. So following on from the current contract and going into the new year, I'll be looking at updating the rest of the EA aims. So the last download for that was in February this year. So we'll look to update that, and then I'll also update some local authority asset data that we've been delivered. And once the ASO1 gap fill has been QC'd, we'll also push that to the website as soon as possible. Going forward, I think Thomas touched on this as well. We'll be doing alternating years either side of Eastbourne, so between the ASO1 area and the ASO2 area. And this will be a flexible contract depending on local authority capability. And then we'll also be looking to expand the asset register in going into the next phase with a lot more private assets. So that's all from me. Any questions?
Good morning, everybody. My name is Warwick-Champion, and I'm going to do So I'm going to start off with a network status update. I'm going to then go on to a few product updates that we have from this year. I'm going to touch on a few different research and analysis projects that we've done, and I'm going to finish looking forwards at our long-term strategy with my network. So starting off with the wavebuoy recovery rates. So this is the Southeast wavebuoys. And down in the right-hand corner, you can see the schema that we use to categorize the recovery rates. So more than 95% we say is very good. More than 90% is good, 80% is moderate, and less than 80% is poor. So as Thomas said, we hold ourselves to a high standard. So we're always aiming for that more than 95% recovery rate across all of our sites. Here you can see for this year, for the Southeast wavebuoys, we have achieved that, although that doesn't mean that we had a quiet year, rather that the unscheduled events we had were dealt with rather swiftly. So we did have a number of unscheduled events, including 2 adrift events, the first of which was at Seaford earlier this year, where the wavebuoy was put adrift. It went out into the channel and started drifting eastwards, but it was recovered very quickly the same day. And luckily, we had a new buoy redeployed out there in 7 days. Unfortunately, as Thomas touched on, we weren't quite as lucky at where in this case, the wavebuoy went adrift in the middle of the night, and by breakfast time, it had found its way onto the rock armour at Medmarie. So unfortunately, that buoy, it was a complete write-off. But on the silver lining, we do have now a lovely sensor that you can come and look at if you come and visit the CCO office. So that boy was a write-off, but luckily we do have our spares full. So we deployed one of the spare buoys back up again, this time within 5 days. So we have some thanks to our contractor for keeping those on track this year. Onto the tide gauges. In general, we had very good recovery rates, with a couple of exceptions up there. The first is Brighton, where there was quite extensive works at the marina over summer period. So the VRS-20 had to be removed for quite a few months. But it is back out there now and collecting data again. The other up there you see is Swanage Pier, where we did remove a fair amount of data from through quality control because we did have an issue with spiking at site. We have since changed the maximum sensor range on the wave racks, and that has managed to reduce the spiking there quite a lot. So now the recovery rates at site are back up to about 99%. The other up there is Arran, which we still don't have stage for this year because the black hole remains inaccessible. And then for the Met stations, again, aside from Arran, we have very good recovery rates across all of the southeast sites. Now onto the product updates. So the first is the addition of tide predictions as an endpoint on the API. So these are the tide predictions that we've been producing in-house since 2024. And if you want more detail on the methods that we're using for those, there is the TN05 technical note on the website. So for each tide prediction, we also provide the high and low water values for the tide before and after the value that you're looking at. And obviously, you can also query these for future dates up to the end of the uploaded time series. So currently, that's the end of 2026. You can also find the tide predictions in the tide endpoint, but obviously, those are just where they also occur with tide measurements. So for those who can't query future dates. And then again, we have our usual filters. So you can filter by site, the latest prediction or the prediction closest to a particular time. And also a duration of predictions with all the same normal output types. The API is also still under development. So our next thing that we will be working on is adding QC data as an endpoint. So that's something. The next product update is the storm catalogue that Thomas mentioned. So if you weren't familiar with the previous version, it's found on the resources page. And it was created in 2018. And formed the basis of the 2018 paper on spatial characteristics and storm duration by Thomas and Travis. So there is a new addition in the storm catalogue for each storm where a 1 in 1 year return period is exceeded at one of the wavebuoy sites. So previously this was very difficult to keep up to date, but now we've kind of managed to automate a lot of processing behind that, so it's much easier. And we also backdated the storm catalogue to the beginning of the programme. So all of the storm data that was affected by broken waves that we recovered in 2023 is also included in those storm catalogue maps. So for each entry, we've got these spatial footprint information for the storm track. For the most recent entry, which was Storm Amy, beginning of October, we have this map up here. So you can see the size of the circles there represent the wave height return period that was exceeded. And the colour of the circles signify how close the peak was to high water. So Storm Amy, you can see that storm thresholds were only exceeded on the west of the country, and the peak occurred at high water in the northwest and very close to high water in the southwest. We also have added on there the tidal coefficient, which is a gauge of when the storm occurred in the spring cycle, which was a suggestion by Uwe, actually, so thank you for that one. And we have created that based on a method used by Sean, which is the French equivalent of the UKHO. And that essentially takes the maximum tidal range on the day of the storm compared to the maximum daily tidal range across a 40-year time series of tide predictions. So for that system, a reference tide gauge is used, as with Sean. So for here, we have chosen Herne Bay as the reference port for the storm catalogue. Since it was chosen to be representative for the spring stage for the country. Also, across on the right-hand side, you can see the table, which is just for the details of what the actual storm peaks were at each site and the timing of the peaks. And you can find all of those pictures easy to download on this main page. And if you click on the actual day of the storm, that also downloads the storm information table in a text file format. Obviously, we also have the storm tracks. So these are made using the atmospheric pressure data available through AeroFi. And you can see for Storm Amy that it follows a really nice classic UK storm tracks generated somewhere in the West Atlantic, crossing the Atlantic quite quickly and dissipating somewhere in the North Sea. So that is that. I'm going to move on to some research analysis updates, or headlines really. The first of which is the Wave Trends paper. So I'm sure quite a few of you have already seen us present on this, either at the SCOPAC webinar at the end of last year or at the ICE conference in Bristol. So I'm not going to go into this in any great detail. Just really going to summarise by saying that we did find some interesting trends in the wave data, particularly in the wave period exceedances, which you can see up there on the right, which we found to be increasing at the majority of sites, particularly those exposed to the east or southeast. At a few sites, we also found localized changes in wave direction and increases in the occurrence of bimodal seas. We also didn't find trends in wave height, which is interesting. So this is really just a kind of headliner to say that the full paper on the national analysis is available if you want to look into that in any more detail. The next is an upcoming report. So this we did through SCOPAC, and it's an assessment of the EEA coastal flood boundary data set compared to measured tide data. So both at our own tide gauges and the tide gauges from the National Tide Gauge Network. And yeah, so we're going to do a webinar on that report. It hasn't quite come out yet. It's on the 9th of December. So if you are interested in that, then keep an eye on the SCOPAC website. And the last thing is we published a few technical notes this year. So just keep interested in those. The first one up there is assessing drift and step changes in wave height at Milford. So this one was produced because at Milford it is the only site where we have ever changed the model of wave buoy, and that was towards the start of the programme. It was changed from a data well wave rider Mark II to the directional wave rider Mark III. So this was just done really as a check as a nice confirmation really that no changes did occur in the wave height measurements there. There was no drift or step changes rendered since it was replaced in 2005. The next one up there is just a note on using data well wave rider buoys to measure infragravity waves, just to say that they are not suitable for measuring infragravity waves. And that's really because there is a high pass filter which cuts off signals with wave periods longer than 30 seconds. And there's a good reason for that. It's because at very low frequencies, the accelerations on the buoy are very small and they can get lost in the sensor noise. So they're not suitable for measuring those very long wave waves. And the last one there isn't quite on the website yet, but it will be very soon, and it's a comparison of the atrometer, step gauge, and wave rex to at Herne Bay. So now looking forwards, I'm going to talk about the wave buoy long-term strategy. And the objective of this really is to enhance the efficiency and the long-term resilience of the wave buoy network. So to kick this off, we went to visit Datawell to kind of draw on their technical expertise and get their ideas on our strategy. And we came away with that. We came away with some really good ideas about innovation and also ways we can make the wave buoy network more efficient. So on the innovation side there, we've got the switch from our current setup, which is using HF telemetry to shore stations, and changing to GSM transmission where possible, which would really reduce our dependency on third parties, limit points of failure in the transmission, and simplify the hardware and software stack needed to get the data from the buoys. The second one on there is the use of AIS, automated identification systems, on wave buoys. And the idea there is that it would make our wave buoys a lot more visible to the general marine users and reduce unscheduled events and potential buoy repair costs due to unscheduled events. On the other side, we have our efficiencies. There is some focus there on improving battery use because batteries are the most expensive consumable that we use in the wave buoy network. And there's a few ways we could do this: intelligent test boxes and solar panels. And together, those measures could potentially improve our battery use or reduce our battery use by 3/4. And then under that, we're also looking into extending the service interval, which would be a really huge cost saving for the network. So on the first point, GSM, the first thing we did was the bench test at day 12, which you can see in the top right there. And that was a really nice proof of concept that it did work, and we could in fact get the expected outputs from the buoy using the new transmission method. We then moved to the desktop analysis, looking at the available data from Ofcom connected nations and extrapolating the kind of onshore data to our offshore locations, accounting for degradation with distance from the coast. And that produces those graphs that you can see there. But now we're moving on to the next stage, which is field testing, which is really using this little sniper mobile testing device to go on site and measure what the actual available mobile signal is at these sites. So this will be done by a contractor. It'll be done over the next year or so, measuring the available signal at those sites so we have real confidence if we are going to make that switch. Next is AIS. So this is a really small unit that can be attached to the kind of existing HF radio setup. So it can be retrofit on our existing buoys. It's relatively inexpensive compared to the cost that we would pay if there was an unscheduled event and if we did have to go and repair a buoy for some reason. And also it could potentially replace radar reflectors, which is important if we're looking into putting solar panels on the buoys, which don't need space for those radar reflectors. It's also of note that a lot of small vessels don't actually use radar, so they're not serving a huge purpose at the moment. 45% of vessels do currently transmit their position over AIS, and a lot more receive those positions because the receivers for AIS are actually a lot cheaper than transmitters, and they've kind of become a standard safety feature on a lot of modern vessels, so they're integrated. The AIS system itself does use a little bit of the buoy batteries, but that is minimal if the buoy is remaining on site. So talking of batteries, so our two ways of improving battery use, firstly, the intelligent test boxes. So this is a system where the buoy batteries are used in 3 compartments. So rather than all of the batteries being used at once, they're used at one compartment at a time, and the one compartment is completely emptied before it moves on to the next compartment. So that means when we're rebatterying, we can just rebattery a compartment at a time of completely empty batteries instead of potentially rebatterying when we've got already partially used batteries but not fully depleted batteries. On the other side, we've got our hatch covers with solar panels. So the solar panels, they don't charge the buoy batteries, but they're rather used instead of the batteries when there is solar potential. So from experience with the Netherlands, they basically say that the buoys are running mostly off the solar panels all throughout the summer and then relying on the batteries mostly in the winter. So that measure on its own could reduce their battery use by about half, and together about 3/4. Then our last point there, extending the service interval. So this would be potentially extending it from 6 months, which is our current service interval, to 1 year. And we've got a really good evidence base to draw on for looking into that. So the 2 things up here, the check factor, which was in the Hydrodynamics presentation last year, is a measure of the how well the buoy is following the expected orbital motion of the waves. And you can see that in the graph at the bottom as an example. And any deviation from the expected orbital motion can indicate that there is an issue at the buoy and might indicate that we would need to go and intervene. Then on the right-hand side there, we've got our unscheduled events log. So that is for every site a record of all of the times we've had to go to site to intervene, either an unscheduled event or just for services in general. So using those 2 data sets together, we created survival curves. So i.e. how often, how long does the buoy last before there is something that we need to intervene for? If we look at the x-axis there, it's just days since the last service, and the y-axis is that survival probability. So it's 1, so full survival if it's just been serviced on day 1. And then that degrades over time with time since the last service. We can also invert that and say, what is the probability that we will need to go to site to intervene? And that's kind of how we read this here. So we can see that when we get to 6 months, or rather, if we're looking just at the blue line now, which is the line for the check factor and the motion anomalies, we actually found that although the motion anomalies were quite frequent, they largely didn't result in a large data loss. So it's more of an issue for quality control and just flagging out a small section of data rather than actually needing to go to site to intervene. So if we discount that blue line and just more look at the red line, which is the unscheduled events, how often do we actually need to go to site? We can see that the probability of going is about 20% at 6 months, about 40% at 1 year, and 60% at 2 years. So for us, we took that as quite good news. So 60% of our boys operate without issue, without intervention for at least 1 year. So that provides quite a good basis for extending the service interval to 1 year. Obviously, there is still that 40% of the boys that would need attention, would need another intervention, as well as that annual service, and we'll take that into account. And obviously, this graph is also a national picture, so there is some regional variation in there, and there are some particular sites that we do tend to go to a lot more than others, which are generally fine. So if we take into account annual servicing and also the fact that we will potentially go to 40% of those boys more often, we still manage to save approximately 24 services per year. So 32% of services annually. So we have quite a good handle now looking at the strategy on the financial and technical side of things. But obviously the wave network doesn't operate in a vacuum, and there's other considerations that we need to take into account, which secondary effects and things that are a little bit harder to measure. So I'm not going to go into detail on all of these, but just as an example, if we have less services, then our contract becomes smaller. Is it still as attractive to the same contractors that we would be looking to update that contract? And also on the social side of things, how will extending that service interval to 1 year, how will that impact the small vessel companies that we rely on to do our servicing? So there's still some things to look at, but we have started reporting on this, and we are looking to wrap the project up by early next year. So we'll keep you updated. So that is everything from me. Questions, I think, at the end of Sam's presentation. Yeah. Thank you.
Hello. I'm going to round out these sessions of program updates with an update to the website, coastalmonitoring.org. I'm Sam Pitman. I'm the GIS analyst at the Channel Coast Observatory. And yeah, I'll give you a brief kind of whistle-stop tour over what's happened over the last year since the last APM. So to start off with, I'll give you an idea of the data that we've had downloaded from the website, as well as the data we've uploaded to the website. So here's a snapshot of the website downloads for the national website, because at CCO, we not only manage the uploads for the Southeast, but the whole national network. And as you can see there, there's been a steady sort of increase in downloads each year. And in the last quarter, it kind of reached about £200 million worth of data downloaded from the website. It's worth noting that this doesn't encompass all of the data on the website. For example, it doesn't include the asset data that Hayley mentioned earlier, but it's a good kind of idea of the most of the data from the data catalog and how much data we provide on the website. And then if you cut that down to just the Southeast, you can see in the last quarter, actually half of those downloads were in the Southeast alone, which isn't normal. That is more than usual. It's usually a bit more evenly distributed between the different regions. But yeah, it must have been a busy quarter. So this is a quick look at the website hits. On the left, you can see overall hits and overall website pages opened. And on the right, you can see that we filtered that down to human use. Recently, we've made an effort to distinguish between all hits and those that we think are humans, because there's been a big uptick with the rise of sort of AI and large language models. We think it's important to still monitor both of these, because inevitably coastal practitioners will use these large language models for their work. So we want to be able to ensure that the data we provide is digestible both by the humans that are using it, but also by these sort of AIs. So if people use those, they're still going to be getting the best data that we can hope to provide them. Then in terms of uploads, on the left here, you can see national website uploads, and on the right, you can see uploads in the Southeast. Since the last APM, there's been over 200,000 new files added to the website. Some highlights: over 400 gigabytes of aerial photography, over 400 gigabytes of LiDAR, over 50 gigabytes of topographic data, 30 of which were in the southeast. And then at the bottom, you can see our national real-time upload time and southeast real-time upload time. So yeah, lots of data uploaded, over 4,000 days worth of wave data uploaded in the southeast alone. So then I'm going to talk about some of the incremental changes that are happening on the website. The first of these is the expansion of the 3D viewer. I touched on this last year for those of you who were here last year. We have a browser-based cesium viewer, which you can use to visualize point clouds in your web browser at home. So even if you don't have access to software to visualize point clouds, you can still look at our point cloud data. Since the last year, we've now uploaded all of our high definition asset scans from Portlandville to Sellesyville. So as you can see, they're all accessible through our asset viewer. But moving forward, we plan to be able to make more of the 3D point cloud data that we collect available on the website. We're currently working on integrating this into the main map viewer and data catalog so we can upload some of the topographic point clouds we have. And then we're going to test that in the southeast and then hopefully roll that out across the whole network. You might see some more of that in the next year. We've also made significant improvements to the profile viewer. So in the back end, we've made sure more of the data is actually available when you click on a profile. But on the front end, a nice little feature that's been added is that when you're trying to choose your profile, it'll highlight the one that you've got selected, which when there's a lot of profiles in an area is actually a surprisingly useful tool. We've also had further additions to the resources page. So the wave catalog, as was mentioned by Lizzie and Thomas, but there's also a new splash tool that's been added. This has been developed by the University of Plymouth Coastal Process Research Group, supported by the National Oceanography Centre, and it's an in-browser tool that can provide an overtopping tool that will act as a forecasting model, directly helping to mitigate effects of coastal hazard and ultimately guiding new climate adaptation strategies. If you're interested in that, there's a lot more information on the page itself. Next up, we've got ongoing development. These are projects that we're still working on now, but are on the website. So we've had a CoastSnap page and our resources page for a while, but there's only 2 sites on it. In the last year, we've now added all of the sites that the Southwest Coastal Monitoring Programme manage. This means that, now when you click on that page, it brings up a map viewer rather than just the 2 sites it did before. Each of those pins represents one of the different Southwest Coastal Monitoring CoastSnap sites. And there's also a table below that lists them all. When you click on one of those pins, it brings you to the CoastSnap page for that specific site. At the top here, there's some filtering tools, so you can choose the date of images you're interested in. You can choose how many photos you want to see, and you can also easily navigate between the different sites. The big image at the top is actually an animation, so you can click on that and it will animate between the different things so you can see the coastal change. There's the option to download the images, to download the slideshow, and also a link to the upload portal. And then below you can see each of the individual images too. This should be an example of one of those animations. So yeah, you can see that these photos collected by citizen scientists really do show the coastal change that you wouldn't necessarily collect any other way. We've also added a number of new help guides to the website. So in the main map viewer and data catalog, now when you click on the help button, it brings up a panel to the right. This has a link to a video guide, which is comprehensive, but also has sort of a step-by-step guide. So as you're using the website, you can have the help as you're doing the things that you're being helped to do, which, just I think makes it a lot more accessible for new users. So we've got this on the main map viewer and data catalog, and we've also got one for the asset register that Hayley mentioned earlier. We also have plans to add a third one for the real-time pages as part of a new architecture project that we're working on, that we've been affectionately referring to as the WAVE project, the Web Access Visualization Engine. This is a sort of a completely new look at the real-time data pages, how they're graphed and how you can navigate the data there. So why are we going about this? The current architecture is built on, it's old, it's about 20 years old, almost as old as the program itself. It's under continuous development, and it currently contains a lot of hard-coded settings and hacks to get to the place it is today. Each of the static graph images are created on the server using very old tools, and there's no interactivity with those graphs. And each time you want to reload it, you have to do a whole page reload. The new architecture that's being worked on has been built from scratch using modern code. It's well documented and doesn't have those hard codes that were in there before. Metadata and data is assembled at back end for all the charts, and it's for each individual site or page, and then it's sent to the front end via Ajax. The JavaScript front end receives and creates these new chart.js charts on the fly. Each of the individual charts can be interacted with, and it's developed in a way that it can be improved as we move forward as well quite easily. And both versions are going to be able to integrate with the website dashboard functionality. So some quick highlights of why we're doing this. The new graphs will be interactive and customizable in a way that wasn't possible before. It's going to be able to integrate the quality control data that Lizzie was talking about earlier into the actual browser-based display. And it's a flexible design that will allow for easier future improvements. And now this is the part of the presentation I'm a bit scared of, because I'm going to try to give you a live demonstration of these new pages if they play ball. Okay. I have to try to navigate you on trackpad. So here's one of the new Wave pages for Boscombe. As you can look here, this is all interactive. You can hover over any point. It will show you the wave height or whatever you want to see. You can zoom in by drawing a box. You can reset zoom here. You can switch to a table view, so you've still got access to the table view that we used to have. You can download a CSV and a PNG directly there on the screen. So you can customize the data that you're after using the filter tools at the top, and then get exactly the data you're after on the screen, but also as a download. You can then flick on and off this, which will either be included or not included in your download, depending on what you choose. And then you can also trigger on and off any of the different lines on the graph as you wish. And this is still a work in progress. We also have the same for our time data with all the same customizability. There's that. If we download one of these, let's see if this works. Oh. Okay, it's coming up in a sec. Yeah, so it just downloads exactly what you selected. It's a clear PNG, so depending on your settings, it would normally have a white background, but this is in dark mode. And then the same again for all our net stations. So here's a look at deal. You can navigate between the different time. This might be a bit much to ask. Go to a month, but then yeah, you can change between different time frames. You can still click on and off all of the different things. And then the plan with this going forward is that we're going to sort of soft launch it, hopefully quite soon, alongside the current real-time data pages, so that you won't not have access to anything you had access to before. And then you can integrate both into the dashboard functionality and everything like that as well. As well as I could have hoped. That's good. As always, keep your eyes out for new features. We have an X, so follow us there. We any major changes we announce on there. But we also have a quarterly newsletter, which when we launch new features, we normally do an article to sort of talk about why we've done that and what it includes. So do follow that if you don't already. If you have any questions, feel free to contact me or grab me later. Or I think it's the question session now.
Yeah.
So yes. Anyone online that has any questions, feel free to ask, and I will relay for you. Let me close this website.
Fantastic. Well, we certainly had a lot of information there in that first session. Could I ask the 4 speakers to come up onto the stage? I'm sure they must have plenty of questions on the floor, so we'll open the room to questions for our 4 speakers. Uwe.
It's a question for the website. Excellent. Question for the website. I think it has been a difficulty path and still not working in the old version for the wave and display. That if you're scrolling down to say wave direction and you want to go the week before, or you just want to, there's an arrow that it always means that you are going back to the top. Now on this page you just showed, there's just an arrow going back and forth at the top. Would it not be lovely to be able to move back and forwards in time on the display that you are actually on at that moment, rather than having always the same page? One has to slow down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In case anyone's online, yeah, I think Jason might have already fixed that for you in the new version, because the bit at the top, the bit at the top kind of pans down now as you scroll down, so you can still access like the date filter part at the top all the way down through the wave directions at the bottom of the page. So yeah,
it doesn't refresh the page when you change any of the charts. So anything on the page that you change doesn't require a full, you requested the whole page.
That's what I want. Excellent. Can I ask the second one? When do we get, I mean, it's lovely now that we can get the tide data as well onto the wave data superimposed, and now that we have the tide forecast, when will we get wave forecast? Because obviously for some wave boys it's already available for the competitor's website, and it's just a pain to go backwards and forwards from one website to the other.
There's 3 things we're currently doing on that. So we have tried to see if we can have forecasts on the monitoring program website for quite a long time. We've explored various avenues that have sort of all reached a dead end at some point. We did source quote at some point, just buy them in. And for an individual site, that's actually not too bad. It's a couple of £1,000s. But once you scale that by 36, now 38 wave buoys, it becomes a very large number over 6 years. So we couldn't continue with that either. So instead of going from the top down, we're exploring an approach from the bottom up. Now we're experimenting actually with New Forest District Council. And this came after a particular storm event. It wasn't named. I forget the exact date, but Pete might remember. This was basically an event that was sort of a bit underappreciated, but very localized as well. It did not receive any specific forecasting support for local authorities from the EA, because it wasn't that big of an event. But nonetheless, at New Forest District Council, there was about £250,000 worth of damages and effort in order to put this coastline straight again after that. So that sort of highlighted the fact that New Forest could actually use a forecast for that purpose. So we actually sourced one from them. Fugger was providing us with a forecast for that individual site. We are just finishing up the validation of that and the validation reports for that, because we don't want to put that forecast out to the public without it being validated first. But New Forest has had access to that model for a couple of months now. This will be the first winter that they will have it. And we'll use that as a case study to see how much efficiencies, how much usefulness New Forest can actually get out of that. And then that is a model that we can offer to any local authority as well. If they have a couple of £1,000s to spare, they think that would be cost beneficial, we can provide you with a model output for that particular wave buoy that you typically monitor for your coastline. So that's one thing that we can do, and that would be a bespoke model, sort of best in practice thing that we can offer. At the same time, we're still trying to explore whether there's open source alternatives out there. So we are actually pulling in the Siemens forecast for Northwest Shelf for all wave buoy locations, and we've been doing that for a couple of months, again behind the scenes. We're going to carry that over the winter, and we're going to validate all of those data sets as well to check whether at certain locations an open source data set might actually be appropriate for those places. But again, we'll validate that, and when we offer it to our users, we will have some sort of margin of error there that we can communicate as well. So there's a certain nuance there to when you're using that model. And then the third thing we've been exploring, well, Jason will talk about this afternoon, which is this AI approach to forecasting, which seems to all of our surprise, if I may say, works rather well at Milford. And that pilot program sort of finished up now. And as Jason will explain, we are looking at ways to build that out now, do a bit more validation, see if we can operationalize it. And that might become a sort of third alternative of a fairly efficient and cost-efficient way to get forecasts to our users.
Any other questions? Roger. Got to shout.
Shout out a bit louder. Having been involved with the programme from before its inception, it never ceases to amaze me how things have progressed, and I'm looking on in awe. But my question really is about the submission to LPRG, and given what's happened to Marks & Spencer's, Land Rover Group, whatever, on data security, is there a little page within the new submission that will give confidence to LPRG that they are funding something that won't be hacked in the near future? How it will be done, I don't know, but you've got some numbers up on the screen that have got lots of pound signs, and I can see somebody saying, well, we can make something out of this.
Yeah, it's currently not in the business case, I can say, but it is a good idea that we may want to incorporate that. Charlie should be online. I'm sure she's scribbling that down as we speak. For our Waveboy long-term strategy, that is actually something that we are exploring. And Lizzie mentioned it, but we are working with Richard Liptrot, who is at CS, and that is part of his work package, essentially, to explore sort of ways in which that we could be vulnerable to cyber attack via this new 4G, 5G comms pathway that we are exploring. Then the honest answer is that we are relatively vulnerable, but there's relatively easy fixes to them as well to make that a lot harder, essentially. For anything more detailed than that of how we are currently protected, Jason is your man, but I don't think he should give away any of our secrets necessarily for something that's being recorded.
Extra information security policy and full-time job, just keeping an eye on things.
Absolutely. If nothing else, LPRG should be happy that you've addressed the situation, or at least thought of.
That's right. And in effect, we are, and Jason can correct me if I'm wrong, but we are under the exact same protections policies as the University of Southampton is, given that we use their servers. So basically that is sort of the system that we are piggybacking on to a certain extent.
Insurance policy.
Yeah.
I was thinking, obviously the university's got its procedures, but it's getting the data to the university, that vulnerability there.
So that's exactly what we're exploring in that long-term strategy.
Great, thank you very much.
Okay, we do have a question online. It's from Tim Hunt, and it's to Hayley. Do you survey privately owned assets also?
We don't really have any private assets in the contract at the minute, but that's something we're going to look to do in the next phase of monitoring. Yeah, we're just going to get a nice baseline of the whole Southeast first, and then look for private assets in the future.
Okay, any other questions? Yes, lady at the back.
Thank you. Coming from an environmental perspective and the capacity that might be available in the forecasting and AI analysis that you're developing, I wonder if in that case you might be able to add value to the evidence base around the environmental improvement targets for restoration of sea marsh, seagrass and silt marsh and so on. So with respect to, for example, wave energy and the development of greening that I know you capture in your area of topography and subtidally that you could evidence, and you've got that historical data set. There's more projects to move forward. I want, around artificial reefs and around barriers and so on. positive or negative, I wonder if you can start to draw inferences around the effects of interventions and quantification of those benefits so that it might support business cases and restoration efforts. Thanks.
I think, as you implied, the data is certainly there to do that. It's not something that we've looked into so far. And in all honesty, our priority will always be FSUM first. And when I sort of present about these new visualizations, analysis tools, those are sort of the first tools that we will develop. But nonetheless, that sounds very interesting. And please do get in touch with us and we can see what we can do to support in that.
Thanks.
Okay, any last questions?
Yeah, really interesting presentations. Thank you. More of a comment really, but just talking about the DGL matrix 400 that you mentioned. That I thought was really exciting. The possibilities of what that can do. It seems like it could be a real game changer in terms of LiDAR virtual geometry. We run the mini the Ball Pro, which we find really useful. How good that's been for things like waypoints and monitoring. So yeah, just really interesting in seeing how that goes.
Okay, any other questions before we break for coffee? Richard.
Hi, with the Coastal Defence Asset Register, what is the approach going to be going forward in terms of maintaining and updating that database, particularly with AIMS data as well, and how you make sure that we've got one source of the truth for that data?
So the AIMS data is, well, I'm in the process of updating it in a minute, but we pull it down directly from the AIMS API, and then that's just processed and pushed straight to the website as is. As far as the inspection contracts that we've currently got, so we've got the AS01 sort of from Eastbourne to Gravesend, Isle of Grain, sorry, and then from Eastbourne to Portland Bill. We'll just be doing that on alternating years to keep data newer than 2 years and make sure it's complete across there. And we'll just adapt it to what local authorities can or can't provide us with.
Okay, well, that's taken us up to coffee time quite nicely. Just to say that Charlie has put in the Teams chat, she's made a note regarding the data security question. So Charlie's on the case. Okay, so we'll break for coffee now. And if we could be back by 11:45, we'd much appreciated. Thank you.
small scale.
Sorry. Yeah, there you go. I think they should be up here now. Sorry about that, everyone.
Yeah, so as part of our reporting, we'll produce a historic CSA chart. So this shows the cross-sectional area of each profile along the frontage. It provides a really nice quick overview to quickly identify areas that are low and potentially need maintenance. In addition to this, we will produce a detailed volumetric analysis. So we will run our baseline data against a critical beach level. We'll then use this to identify areas that are low and also identify areas that we can use as pockets for extraction for recycling works. As this beach is very low, we'll also conduct a walkover survey before any recycling work starts, just to ensure that the pockets that we've identified are actually viable to use. So next frontage along is Folkestone and Sandgate. This frontage is most recently been updated in 2004 as part of a large capital works scheme. You saw the update of the Victorian seawall, in addition to the installation of 5 rock groins and a 380,000 cubic metre beach replenishment project. Also schemed into this was the biannual recycling, which typically moves 150,000 cubic metres annually. The main focus of the work here is to prevent the west to east drift from moving into the far east bay, highlighted there. This bay is privatised, so essentially once shingle moves past that final rock groin into this bay, it's no longer part of the system. We can't access it anymore and reclaim it. So as part of our reporting, we will produce a volumetric difference model against design model. Because the Folkestone and Sandgate frontage is extremely open, so the largest bay, if I circle back, the largest bay here is 2.6 kilometres wide, so it's very difficult to stop the drift. We will divide the frontage by 100-metre chainages just to better quantify the change, and also this really assists on site with the actual contractors moving the material. Once we've identified the areas that we want to move, we will do a cost analysis. So we'll calculate the pre-programmed costs of the work. That's in collaboration with the wider engineering team at Canterbury. Then once these costs are confirmed, we'll produce a final works plan that we then hand off to the contractors, and they will mobilise on site and move the shingle where directed. Next frontage along, further down the south coast, is Littlestone. So the priority here is preventing flood risk because the majority of the area behind this frontage is incredibly low lying. So the largest project was in 2004. It saw the deposition of 260,000 cubic metres of shingle. Since then, there has been further replenishment in 2016. 49,000 cubic metres was deposited along the frontage. Additionally, there's been the construction of a rock groin in the north of the unit and the south. In the north, it was constructed as part of the 2004 works, and in the south, it was constructed in 2014. This was a result of the identification of a drift divergence. So this unit is currently losing material to the north and the south. That poses quite a unique challenge for the recycling works. Here again, we'll produce a cross-sectional area chart so we can get a quick overview of the areas that are at risk. So we can see here profile 614 and 616. So these are the furthest south. Where's the clicker? Is that one? These ones here are falling into maintenance range, and one is actually dropped into critical. What we'll then do as part of our reporting is we'll extract that profile from our baseline and we'll plot it against design, maintenance and critical level, just to get an even closer view as to the health of the beach. So you can see here, 614 is sitting at critical. We'll then also do a detailed volumetric analysis. And this also just helps to reinforce it. And as you can see here, 614, we'll see a nice thick strip below design level, and again against maintenance, thick strip of, where is it? There you go. Strip of beach below maintenance. We'll calculate the volume of each area, but we're looking at implementing the same 100-meter chainage system as we use in Folkestone, because we're hoping that that will help us pinpoint the location of the drift divergence. And additionally, it should help the contractors on site with the actual navigation of the recycling work. The final frontage I'm going to talk about is Broomhill. The policy here is hold the line. Again, the focus is protecting the low-lying areas behind from flood risk. The frontage can be divided by its defences. So in the east, we've got a large rock revetment constructed in 2015. With an additional wave wall on top. The purpose of monitoring the beach down here in front of this rock revetment is to ensure that it's at an adequate level to work as tow weighting for the revetment. In the east, we've got 8 timber groins. Typically, this beach here has been maintained by small recycling works from Canberra. It's historically been very stable. As part of our reporting, we'll again produce a trigger level chart. And again, you can see here, this beach historically has never dropped into alarm range or crisis, but recently we've noticed two profiles have. As mentioned, we'll produce a topographic difference model for the eastern part of the unit. Again, no volumetric analysis because here we're only looking to make sure that the beach is above a certain crest height, just so it's enough to act as tow weighting. But then when we move to the east of the unit, the west of the unit, we've actually recently started doing a more detailed volumetric analysis because certain areas have dropped into critical range. So the recycling here is to the extent of hundreds of cubic meters. So it's a really small project. So the more detailed we can do, the more detailed analysis we can produce here, the more they can really focus that recycling work and get the most out of the small amount of material that they had. So just a really quick summary. I hope that's given like a bit of insight into how our beach data that we collect feeds into beach management plan. I think once you pair our beach data with like tailored reporting, it can be a very useful tool, especially when you can tailor it to the specific needs of each plan. Thanks very much.
Right. So you will see that there's a different title on the sheet that you have in front of you, and the whole paper could be given in under whatever title you want to give it. This is what the paper was on the ICE, and at the very last slide, there will be QR code. You can download it from there. But if you don't have your telelens on your phone with you, you can email me. Fundamentally, the question is how far and by when. About a third of all the line frontages in England will not be able to be held into the future. So having to give up frontages is essential. But what will happen then? Well, we don't really know, because very few locations on the coast have been allowed to do that. Now, the good thing about this site is it's visible from space. And when I was probably a bit younger, visible from space actually meant something. Nowadays, everything is visible from space. But let's start. So this makes it a bit clearer as to where the water is and where the land is. And this is 2016. And if I put on this line, which is a field wall that you can see on a historic Portland survey map from 1875. So it predates that, and it basically separates the beach from the sea, the beach from the land. And where did it go from there? So this is what it looked like in the paper. This is what it looked like when I presented the paper. And there will be one later on which shows where it is now. It's just, there's sort of a few pixels here that have disappeared over the last few weeks, actually. Now, what does it look like from the ground? So I'll take you to this place, and we are looking eastwards. This was in 2015, so just as things started to kick off, you can see Groyne being outflanked. The beach that had been heavily managed through recycling and recharge was no longer accessible in terms of recycling. The whole route had gone, and so I don't go into the details as to why, but this frontage basically was left to its own devices. Quickly later, you see Groyne 5 here. This is Groyne 5 over there. This is the field wall. Strategically, someone placed World War II tank trap blocks after the war in that location here in one solid line, which might give an indication as to what after the war the risk might have been in those days. But you can see then exposed is basically brick earth, clay, chalk, and we'll come to that a bit later on. But going back to the overview, so this is in 2015 again, and this is what it looks like now. So Groyne 5 has actually disappeared. That was here, no, sorry, I need to go there. So this is what it looks like now. A large bay has formed here, and the good thing is you can see a little bit of cliff, but you can also see quite a lot of beach there, which has accumulated quite naturally there. Now, why do we want, as I said at the start, why do we want to really know that? Well, the cliff was at some point in the past over here, and it is now here. And what we want to know is when will it go to this location, especially if there is a property, for example. Now, the certainty of knowing how the coast has behaved in the past basically increases in the past the closer we get to the present day. So starting from the first Ordnance Survey, basically, maps in late 1870s and something, when you had really good understanding of where the coastline was, and your prediction ability sort of obviously is better at the start than in 100 years' time. Difficulty is, at least on the south coast, but in many other probably hold the line frontages, there is no past, because that line has been put in place in the first Ordnance Survey map. So we don't have any history to go by and extrapolate. And therefore, we basically have no idea what precision or the likelihood of how it goes into the future is in terms of certainty, and I will show this in a minute as well. So the idea is to do something that is a no past. So looking at a few years, the erosion here at high resolution, and then hopefully we get more confidence in our certainty in looking forward. Now, high resolution, what do I mean by high resolution? Means anything to everyone. So high resolution means spatial plus minus 10 centimeters, temporarily up to a tide. So those two lines are separated by one tide. The lines are collected using a GPS, standing at a safe distance from the cliff and walking along, facilitated by these new GPS with IMU inside them, so you can actually hold it at an angle, which otherwise, previously before we had that, it was a bit more strenuous because you had to do the GPS and hold it out as a straight from your hand and walk, sort of hoping that this is about sort of where the cliff is. What you can see is also that under some conditions, so over this one tide, erosion focused on the base, whereas the horns didn't really move. Whereas in the period afterwards, as seen here, lines and points being in the same location, the base didn't retreat anymore, but you had retreat of the horns. So what is driving that? That's the question. And when I say a high resolution, I also mean 1 hour, because the cliff falls during the wave impact, but also as I walked along here and collected the cliff, I collected that line, and as I was doing the beach survey, half an hour later, basically, I noticed, oh, something had fallen back down again, and you had an area of about 2.5 meters long, 6 meters, 0.6 meters wide, that had just fallen in that instance. So it can be quite, depending on when you look at it, you get a different result. So where are we? And what's the problem? Climping, Littlehampton here, and actually having moved to Littlehampton extra to do the surveys there has helped dramatically. Classic South Coast. Main point to note here is that the low water line between 1870s and today is pretty much the same, as is the high water line up here. There's sort of some bits that were held in by groins back then, but that's irrelevant. Most of that is basically held for 106 odd years. Now you notice immediately that the distance between low water and high water is quite varied. And you could say, well, ideally in a site like that, it should be sort of almost similar all the way along because it's a fairly sedimentary coastline. And so the question as to how far could be quite easily addressed by something sort of approximating, just offsetting this parallel to where you think it might be. But when? How long does it take to remove all that stuff there? Zooming in, so the methodology is basically lots of surveys, segment the coastline into 5 meter long wide sections, and then calculate the retreat rate out of that. There are a few structures that were there in 2016, some groins and some breastwork, which will feature on a bit later. This is where the coastline was then in February this year. So 1973, when everything was hunky-dory and there was actually a whooping big beach down here. This is where the where this flint wall is, and you can see this wall was built on something that seemed to have been eroding already. Sort of some form of ditches, whether they are manually or they do look as if they have been naturally created through whatever process. Cliff retreat started in 2016, or the first survey shows sort of a bit here, a bit there, and this is basically where the timber breastwork is. We go forward to 2018, and people became a bit concerned, and at that point we asked consultants to work out, well, how far does it go by when? So they ran a model with two different resistance of the material, and they came up with these two lines, and they said it would take about 50 years to get to that place. Right, good, thank you. Then we thought, well, we might ask some experts. Experts know best. So there are 5 experts, and they said, well, we think the coastline, each individual expert said has a line here, and everybody drew that independently, and that's where they thought the coastline would be in 10 years' time. So 10 years, 50 years, that's quite a difference in terms of predictability, and that's sort of the uncertainty that I said exists. And then we have NSERM, and that's again
sort of 50-year time horizon, again, there's a large difference, not necessarily to where, but when that location will be arrived. Difficulty also is there's lots of structures lying around, and they're usually not necessarily removed. So this is some theoretical considerations where you have structure maintained either side, and then you have a location where there was a defense and you don't do anything, and the structure starts to fail and the coastline starts to respond to it. But that varies depending on where you go, and eventually you probably end up with a very large bay. Illustrating that is looking down along the timber breastwork. You can see some of the rubble that you will see later on next to a groin. Three markers which tell you that the next photo is in the same spot. But that was about 3 years. So that's not too bad. That's actually quite slow. If you want to see why that is the case, so this is an end of breastwork that was standing around, and basically the material that was behind here is gradually washed out, moved out, and that bit of cliff then retreats. And what it forms, this acts as a hard point for the waves to then refract and diffract around and create this lovely sort of equilibrium shaped, spiral shaped bay, and what one would expect. But going back to 2024, just a month later, it looked like that. And there's no further picture from that position because under health and safety, so it's not really advisable to climb onto that breastwork, and has disappeared by now anyway. You may have spotted the bird watcher in the first one. That's where he would have stood. This is where some of the debris behind from the timber breastwork here has arrived at, next to a groin, and forms now basically a reshaping rock revetment or an artificial boulder beach, if you want to be euphemistically. Looking in the other direction, you see this bay that once started to form here. There's a bit of a beach actually there, so that's quite nice. Looking from the center westwards, you see this bit of beach there, but looking westwards, there's not much beach left really there. And again, looking east from that end, similar view to before, but a bit closer by. This is where the high water line probably was back in 2016. What you notice also is not just as the cliff goes back, but that the foreshore is lowering, and you can see this actually in field. These are the groin piles of a diagonal groin that was built in again the late 19th century, and back in 2015 you could see all these piles, and this is where the piles should be, but they no longer are because the ground is lowered sufficiently for those end bits to fall out. And there's a final sort of 6 days in the life of a cliff. So this promontory becomes a stack, and the stack gets a bit more isolated and a bit smaller. And unfortunately, yesterday the stack was still there. Cliff falls, I don't really go. So you get this, but you have to be there on the day because the next day it might have fallen. As I said, there is sort of clay type material, there is chalk, and on top of that is brick earth, which is really quite easily erodible. If you have much beach, you get a beach ramp that allows the beach to actually get onto the cliff behind, which is quite good because as the cliff retreats, this falls back in and replenishes the beach from that. Sometimes you have this clay forming sort of ramps as well, but they are not very long lasting usually because this is again just one tide, no, two tides. You can see here there's this ramp which extended further west. The day later, there's just this little bit left over here. And you can also see this in the difference model where basically you've lost that cliff ramp, the beach, or that part of the beach has not changed at all. Now, in theory, you would expect there's a hard point here So this is around where the waves refract, and there's a hard point down here, either because there was a groin or because there's another groin and the timber breastwork. And the beach is trying to achieve basically that red crossed line according to theory. And the beach is trying to do this. So before the end point moved from this location to that location, you can see that there's sort of this equilibrium bay forming. Then the hard point moves to that location and again tries to form and approach that line. It doesn't really go that far west as theory suggests. Why? I don't know. Looking at the profile, this is the profile where the erosion started earliest in 2015, basically. This is the same location where those groin piles are, and this is basically where the groin piles that used to be there are in the profile, and you can see that here, say at 275 distance, the cliff is the foreshore is actually lowering almost at a gradual rate, and that would be the linear regression would be 11 centimeters per year. But as you go out to below water needs, for example, the black line here, there doesn't seem to be a lot of change there, at least nothing that you can pick up in terms of lowering. Now the final map to show is the eastern end, because whereas at the western end, the updrift hard point remained stable and the downdrift hard point sort of moved. Here, the downdrift hard point didn't really move, but the updrift hard point moved westwards as the breastwork started to fail. So the green dot shows when that bit of breastwork was at that location for the first time, and the green line corresponding relates to the position of the cliff before that point moved to the yellow point. So it's the maximum bay development before the bay sort of switches. And you can see that there's an attempt to form a curve, and when the movement of the updrift hard point is quite slow, you actually do get more and more of a bay forming until that point moves on and you flatten out again. But this end becomes more and more stable. You get a bay forming, and that bay basically is more aligned with the incoming wave direction, so longshore wave power is less, and you do get a beach starting to settle in there. Eventually, what happened in April 2024, this end completely disappeared, and you can see how the cliff raced back basically because it had a lot of catching up to do. This is what's illustrated here. This is 1 year, 16th November to 9th November. Nothing really changed here. Nothing really changed here. This bit has seen sort of about 40 meters at a maximum of going back. And when you look at the drone area supplied by a local resident, you can see why. This is where the beach is. This is where the beach is. There's no beach here. The chalk is just shining through, and so therefore wave run up is a lot more energetic because it's not stopped by the friction with the shingle, and there's basically nowhere where the beach can stick because it's just whizzed along that side. If you summarize this all up in time, so this is time going up here. The scale is, so the average is about 6 meters per year for all of that averaged out. This is in 2 meters per year segments up to the average that gets red for 2, and then those blue, the scale becomes sort of increasing, and it now has to be actually not 39 meters in this location. But what you can see is that erosion has started here and then progressed through time eastwards. As you would expect, longshore wave power, longshore transport removes the shingle first from the west and then carries on removing it further going eastwards. There was also the switch from groin 5 to groin 4, which is illustrated here. But the main interesting thing is that the timber breastwork basically went against the drift direction again. and you can see the erosion moving sort of against that trend. But what is really clear is that beach, no beach, beach. So there's a fundamental impact of the beach. The difficulty is how much beach do you really need? And that most of the erosion takes place in the first year, regardless of where you are. This is blue, then green, blue, green, blue, green. So if people say, oh, wow, this has gone by 50 meters. Well, yeah, next year it will not be 50 meters. And that's the confidence that you can give from that data so far. Now, I tried to link data. It wasn't really possible. This is just for the area here, just a few segments, which were the ones that first started to erode. And yes, this is the distance of contours from the cliff line. And so the further they're away, the more the wider the beach basically in front of it is. And you can see that there was a pickup, a very stark event of sort of erosion taking place of the cliff retreat, which seems to be linked to sort of bigger wave activity. This is not just wave activity, this is run up, so water level comes into it already. And you can see that the beach levels were smaller. But those surveys are far too far apart, and they are not even coastal monitoring surveys necessarily. Trying to work this out is impossible with the data set. And realizing that while writing the paper, I thought, right, so I need to actually go in there and do a lot more surveys. But just to show where the line was in the summer, which is pretty much the same where it is now, except for this location, you can see the prediction for the green line would still have 3.5 winters to go. So I'm pretty confident that yellow line will move and will be within that envelope of the green lines. So that's quite good. But it shows that the modeling or NSERM are widely out. And that's because we don't know very much about it. So in summary, that's the QR code. Retreat and foreshorelowing appear to be independent of geology over the entire period. So at some point you say, oh, wow, this goes faster because this is clay, or this is because it's that. It evens out over time, which is good if you want to predict something, because then apparently the resistance doesn't need to be very detailed in terms of the cliff. Defense failure determines the plan shape changes, so creating those bays. And if you have the proper bay, then you may have a beach present. If you have a beach present, that depends on whether the cliff will erode or not. Initial erosion progressed in a downward direction. So for the paper, there were 35 surveys over the 9 years. I've done 19 since then, and they are all cliff and beach surveys because they're intrinsically interlinked. And so hopefully, at the end of this winter, there might be enough data to find the actual link. Thank you.
Hello everyone, my name is Alec Dane from JBA Consulting. I'm a technical director and I'm going to talk to you about the work we've recently been doing as part of the Hurst Spit to Lymington flood and coastal erosion risk management strategy on modelling the impacts of barrier rollback at Hurst Spit. So I'll start the presentation by just talking a little bit about the context and the background to the spit and where the strategy is kind of concluding that the management should go. Then look at our approach to modelling some of these impacts that we could be predicting for the barrier. A little note on the relevance, the use of the Regional Coastal Monitoring Programme, how it's been integral to the work that we've done, and then look at some of those outcomes and how those outcomes have influenced some of those strategy decisions. So looking at Hurst Spit is a 2.1 kilometre gravel barrier beach based on the eastern extent of Christchurch Bay. The barrier is designated as a special area of conservation, a special protection area, a Ramsar, a triple SI, every sort of designation you could wish on that. That's both the barrier and the back barrier environment. The relatively calm wave climate in the lee of the barrier has allowed the formation of intertidal mudflats and salt marshes, and they support some of the most important breeding bird populations for the whole of the designated sites in the Solent. So cannot stress the importance of this site from an ecological perspective. So I'm not going to dwell on this for today's presentation. It's going to be focused more on the modelling and the data used to facilitate that modelling. But just to provide the background and the context to this, through the strategy appraisal, we have adopted an adaptation pathways approach to the future management of Hurst Spit. An adaptation pathway approach essentially lays out a sequence of decisions to be taken over time and the context in which those decisions would be taken, what changes might need to occur for those decisions to be taken forward. You can see on screen here our pathway for Hurst Spit largely follows a gradual reduction in management over time. So why we are proposing less management of the barrier is primarily three main reasons. Firstly, that very designated status of the barrier means that, the geomorphological interest of the site means that really any beach management on that site is becoming more and more challenging to demonstrate through the habitats regulations. Really, the ecology is underpinned by the geomorphology of the site, and constraining how that barrier wishes to operate in response to the wave climate and sea level rise is really compromising the ability of those habitats to establish fully. Secondly, the long-term sustainability of continued beach management in this area, with over a metre of sea level rise forecast, we are seeing increasing pressures on the ability to maintain and hold the line of that barrier as it is. And finally, the long and short-term affordability of continued beach management is becoming increasingly difficult for New Forest District Council to secure the funding required to undertake the works in the short term, but longer term, the business case and the current funding rules are really putting pressure on the ability to fund continued beach management. So those three reasons really work together to kind of set that direction behind a longer term reduction in beach management at this site. But how that barrier will respond to less management is far from certain. The barrier has been managed in various forms over the last couple of 100 years, and there is a big uncertainty in how it might respond to lesser management. The kind of questions you can see there on screen we posed ourselves: will a breach form in there? How will it evolve? What's the morphological evolution look like? And what does that morphological evolution impact? What is the difference in the wave climate, pre and post barrier rollback? What could be the impacts on the designated habitats? What could be the impact on the wider circulation of sediment within Christchurch Bay and the wider Western Solent area downdrift of Hurst Spit? These are all questions that we have asked ourselves and stakeholders have asked us, and we have been seeking to evidence through data collected in the regional monitoring programme and analysis using that data for the strategy. So I'm going to focus just on those two for today, and we have done other work on the others, but particularly looking at what the potential impacts of barrier rollback could be on the flood risk and the wave climate in the lee of the barrier. So through the strategy, we set ourselves looking at how we could improve our understanding of the coastal processes in the lee of the barrier and how storm waves may propagate over a lowered barrier form in the future. We've done that through the analysis of different system states. Those are different representations of how the barrier might look in the future, whether that's a rollback barrier, a completely removed barrier, how that might influence the salt marsh and mudflats behind. Now, a traditional approach to wave transformation modelling would be a phase averaging approach, models like SWAN or Mike 21. They would not represent the complexity of the processes that would happen with the rollback barrier. So things like waves breaking over a lowered profile, things like the non-linear wave-to-wave interactions as it fills the seabed and propagates from deep water into shallow water, things like the potential release of infragravity waves over the barrier, over that shallow water depth, And all of those potential impacts really kind of lead to potential underestimate of flood risk if we are to neglect those complex processes. So the answer we came up with was looking at a phase resolving model and the open source Reef 3D rather than using a traditional phase averaging approach. These have been in operation and they're kind of quite regularly used for kind of breakwater modeling in kind of deep water. The shallow wave in kind of modeling is more in its infancy. So using that approach, we really have, I think, done a masterclass of how the value of regional coastal monitoring program data could be used here, because none of this modeling would be possible without the data. Thomas's presentation earlier today listed 5 or 6 different data sources. We have used all 5 of those in developing this modeling approach. So none of that would be possible. We've used the latest bathymetric surveys, we've used feature profile surveys, we've used pro-storm surveys, we've used the direct records from the wave buoys and from the tide gauges as well. So I mentioned system states. There is a huge amount of uncertainty in how the barrier will evolve over time. And rather pinning ourselves to, we think it will be this state at this point in time, what we sought to do is model a range of different representations of barrier and salt marsh and mudflat morphology. That means we can understand the full potential range of impacts and not pin ourselves too much to this is our prediction. We can then kind of assess that uncertainty within there. There's 3 system states that I'm going to talk to you about today. Firstly, there's the baseline, that is as recorded from the Regional Coastal Monitoring Programme data, the latest BAFI, the latest beach profile surveys. There is no alteration to the recorded data in the baseline case. Then we have the rollback system state. That is our best understanding of how the barrier may look after a big overwashing event and just in the kind of area that is most vulnerable. And then we have these total loss scenarios. That is the complete removal of sediment out of the system and the big reductions in salt marsh and mudflat morphology. Just looking at those system states in a little bit more detail, you can see here how we have represented the rollback scenario. On the left-hand side of the screen, you can see the existing baseline condition. On the middle image, you can see the topography that we've represented in our wave model, showing a rolled back barrier. We've taken that over the proximal end of the most kind of the nearest to Milford end of the barrier. And we simulated this whale back profile typical of how a gravel barrier beach may roll back in response to a large storm event. So if we look at this compared to reality, we've actually modelled this far more significantly than has been recorded through the Regional Coastal Monitoring Programme data. So on the top left-hand image here, you can see a paper taken from Andy Bradbury's, an image taken from Andy Bradbury's paper in 2012, looking at the impacts of the 1989 event. The red line there represents the post-storm survey after the 1989 storm. You can see it's got a crest level of about 2 meters above ordnance datum. In our model, we have represented this at about 1 meters ordnance datum, so a meter lower than that. You see there the image of the waves breaking over that rollback barrier profile and a pretty good representation of it in our model compared to that reality. The bottom left image shows a difference plot looking at the difference in morphology in our baseline case compared to our rollback case. So you can see a significant reduction in crest level, but all that shingle pushed into the back barrier environment, simulating kind of these rollback events. So we compare this then against the total loss scenario. Here we have essentially just sliced off the top of Hurst Spit down to mean low water springs. We've taken all of the salt marsh and mudflats in the immediately of the barrier down to mean low water springs. That's a couple of meters, 2-3 meters worth of reduction. And then the marshes in the kind of area towards Lymington, we've taken down to mean high water needs. So that is almost 2 million meters cubed worth of shingle essentially vanished from the model. The reality of losing that amount of shingle over a 100-year horizon, you've obviously got to question. So with these different morphological representations of the barrier, we stuck it through the Reef 3D model, and we started to assess the performance of the model in predicting these outcomes. So there's three outcomes that I kind of like to share and dwell on here, because they really show the value of the Regional Coastal Monitoring Programme data. The first one is that Reef 3D provides us with a really robust assessment of the potential impacts of these different barrier morphologies on wave height and wave energy. The second being that actually, when this was really surprising to us, the influence of Hurst Spit on wave climate is relatively limited to the first couple of kilometres of coastline. Beyond there, those areas are still significantly impacted. Sorry, are not significantly impacted. And then finally, we can do whatever beach management we want at Hurst Spit, but really we're not addressing the root cause of the flood risk increases we see in the strategy area. Sea level is the dominant cause of flood risk for us. So taking those conclusions each in turn, firstly, the value of the Reef 3D modelling and the data to support that. From this, we were able to be a lot more confident that we're able to capture the full range of the complex braking over the barrier, and particularly the release of these infragravity waves, which was quite interesting for us. So what do we mean by infragravity waves? Infragravity waves, they are very long period waves. They are 30 seconds plus. As we heard from earlier today, they're very difficult to pick up in these directional wave rider buoys because of that very long period. They can be 60 seconds or longer. And there's emerging research, papers by Vandermeer and Lashley about the role of infragravity waves in coastal vulnerability. It's becoming a really quite kind of buzz area of research currently. These long period waves, you can see on the spectrum on the bottom right, they're really kind of they represent a very small part of the spectrum that we see from those wave rider buoys, but they can actually be generated much more significantly as those waves propagate and change to the near shore. So to demonstrate the value of this modelling, what we've got here in the top right is a map of Hurst Spit, and you can see the red dots on that are areas that we have extracted the wave spectrum from our wave transformation model. Top left, you can see there the different spectra extracted. The blue line represents the spectra immediately in front of the barrier. So in that you can see there is a large amount of wave energy in the sea swell type banding. We have that large peak and a very small proportion held in the infragravity band. As the waves break over the barrier, then you can see all of the sea swell is dissipated. That's that dark line in the top left image, and you're only left with that infragravity component of the wave energy. So those infragravity waves, they have very small height, but very long period. There's a huge amount of energy captured within there. Bottom right, then, we can see the light blue line represents the wave spectra at about 1,000 meters on that chainage marker, roughly in the middle of the marshes. And you can see the energy is dominated again in the infragravity band. Very little energy in the sea swell band. But what's really interesting here is that by 3,000, we're then seeing a lot more of an interesting distribution. We've got a big peak in the infragravity band, but we've also then got a peak in a sea swell band. And that, I'll show you in an image later, is actually the diffraction of waves around Hurst Point and impacting that area. So what's happening in the model? What we can see at the wave rider buoy, we're seeing this kind of chaotic mix of sea swell, infragravity waves, lots of random waves, not really phase aligned. They're just this kind of chaotic mix of wave energy. As those waves propagate to the near shore, they start to kind of form in these nice phases, and you start to get the sea swell bunching together and these underlying infragravity waves generated as they travel to the near shore. Those infragravity waves have a very low height, and so over these different barrier morphologies, we can then actually see those infragravity waves are released. All the sea swell is broken because they're depth limited. Those infragravity waves are able to travel over that rollback barrier. So from this, we can get really good confidence that actually the model is the best tool we can have for investigating this flood risk. We're capturing those much more full range of processes. So the second conclusion that I will share is around the influence of these different system states that we put into our model, and that it's really acutely felt in the first 1,000 meters of coastline. Actually, beyond that, we start to see it's relatively negligible. But let's not diminish the first 1,000 meters. Actually, those overtopping rates generated, they are quite large. They are sufficient to induce embankment failures. So let's look at the evidence behind that. Here on screen, we've got two maps of Hurst Spit. Top image is the baseline case. So we have done no alterations to the bathymetry and topography at Hurst Spit. This is purely an extract of what the wave height would be in an event similar to February the 14th, 2014. Really big storm for us in this area. So you can see outside in Christchurch Bay, big wave heights in excess of 2 meters. They're not depth limited. They're traveling and are relatively undisturbed. But Hurst Spit is doing a wonderful job of sheltering the immediate lee of the barrier. The wave heights drop almost to nothing in the immediate lee of the barrier. But the waves are able to travel pretty unrestricted through Hurst Narrows. Hurst Narrows is roughly 40 meters, 60 meters deep. Those waves are not really feeling the seabed at that point. So we see those big waves coming through the narrow channel there. As the waves feel the bathymetry, they start to diffract and refract around Hurst Point, and you can see them then being directed towards the historic landfill site around 3,000 meters. And if you then think back to that original image I showed you with the two different spectra, that's really explaining what's going on here. Is at the 3,000 meter mark, it is impacted by sea swell, able to propagate through the Hurst Narrows. So really, the influence of Hurst Spit is relatively limited to that first 1,000 meters of coastline, because regardless of the presence of Hurst Spit, that area beyond there is still impacted by these sea swell waves. Bottom image then shows a difference plot, looking at the change in significant wave height between the baseline and the rollback scenario. So unsurprisingly, we see significant increase in wave height over the barrier. That's roughly 1 meter over the barrier. But then beyond then, we start to see this kind of relatively steady dissipation of wave energy, leading to less than 50 millimeter increase beyond that 1,000 meter mark. And really, looking back at 1989, we can see this in effect. So 1989 is what people often refer to as a breaching of Hurst Spit. But it didn't breach, it lowered, it rolled back, but waves were still really effectively dissipated over the barrier. You can see there in the top right image, the big sea state of, in Christchurch Bay, loads of white breaking over the top of the barrier, but then you're really just left with these like knee-high balls of water just moving into the back barrier environment. So from that, you can really start to see the processes that are in operation. If we flip then to the total loss scenario, as I said, this is not really backed by any science. We are not envisaging 2 million meters cubed worth of shingle disappearing overnight. But the value of this system state is really for us to be able to isolate the control Hurst Spit has on the flood risk and wave climate in the lee of the barrier. So you can see from this image on the bottom left here, we're seeing a much bigger impact here because we've removed a lot more of the barrier. But it's still relatively limited to that first couple of 1,000 meters of coastline. You're not seeing big impacts much further into the model domain. But finally, let's not kind of ignore the effect on that local 1,000 meters. This image here looks at the difference in wave overtopping rates from a representative storm event with and without these different morphologies of the barrier. So you can see there the baseline overtopping rates on the bottom image. You've got the rollback, you've got partial loss and the total loss. Within that first 1,000 meters, we are seeing order of magnitude increases in wave overtopping rates. Those order of magnitude increases are sufficient to exceed the tolerable threshold for embankments for wave overtopping. So to conclude this presentation, I think it really nicely shows the value of the Regional Coastal Monitoring Programme data. We've used all sorts of the data that has been talked about today, and really we wouldn't have been able to do this modelling without that data. It has been key to us making evidence-based decisions on the future management of the coastline and trying to set a sustainable strategic direction for the management. Play.
Shall I ask our three presenters to join us on stage?
No.
Have we got any questions for our presenters? Roger.
Question for Eddie and one for Alec. Eddie, you mentioned the private section at the eastern end of Folkestone.
Yes.
And the difficulty of tracking material flowing onto there. I assume that you haven't had too many arguments, discussions, or what you will with the private owners about that you're taking too much.
No, sorry, so we're not actually allowed to take any from there.
No, sorry, not from. Sorry, preventing material is onto there.
Right.
So restricting the amount.
Yes, so
And-
they run their own, they privately run their own monitoring there. So outside of what we do, so they do their own recycling scheme within that bay for there. Funny enough, they actually have, they're noticing erosion in the far east of that bay. So they're on their own scheme to shift it back to where they're noticing it drop.
Right, great, thank
Yeah,
you.
so far, no complaints.
That's excellent. The point of the question was going to be, how do you think that using our data would benefit them? So
Yeah.
no question. Alec, the degradation of the spit itself, do you see there being any risk or chance of the narrows infilling and therefore impacting on the wave climb at 3,000 metres?
So, I mean, the narrows likely formed sometime in the last 10,000 years. And depending on which school of thought it comes from, it might have been through the drowning of the Solent River, and there were various geomorphological processes in operation at that point. There is a huge volume of water moving through that on a daily basis, and all the mapping and conceptual models of the formation of Hurst Spit suggests it was constrained in its growth by the movement of water through those narrows there. We've never seen kind of the barrier moving, growing towards that area, just simply because of the tidal flows through that area. So the morphological assessments that we've undertaken suggest that it is a remote possibility of the infilling of that. I think as well, bear in mind that is -40 metres deep volume.
Yeah, that's quite a trench to build. So it wasn't really the split was defended to hold the fort was there because it was there.
Absolutely, yeah, and we've had a heritage team looking at that, and it was kind of that strategic position of deep water channel. Likely that we've done.
Great, thank you.
Question for Uwe. Obviously, you've done a lot of your own surveying and climping, a huge amount, I'd like to say. I was wondering if you see value in something like Coast Snap, for example, to help with that very high resolution, temporal resolution monitoring. Obviously, you kind of show value of some of the photos you've taken. So, do you see value of something like that?
Well, there was a temporary Coast Snap installation for the 6 tides on the last flight. That was me standing there because probably next week or the next spring tides, that spot will not be there anymore unless we have a hovering platform. That seems to be unlikely. But the question is good in the sense that what is in the title of the presentation, I didn't address, is should the coastal monitoring program for this site, it says no active dimension, similar to other sites where Metmarie and west of Metmarie, where it says landfill alignment. And so therefore, under our risk-based approach, they should get less surveys than actually more. And the question is whether one should actually focus not just on the historic reason for the coastal monitoring, i.e. supporting schemes and building stuff, more supporting collecting data for what is going to happen in the future in many other places. And that may not be building stuff, but taking stuff out and letting stuff happen.
But at the moment, there's a throw and there's this side, nothing else. And to allow a third of the line function to go without much information. And who is monitoring it other than the coastal monitoring?
Any other questions? Oh, yeah, Travis.
No. I will put the question to my modelers though. I should have caveated, I am no modeler. I'm an avid user of modelling, but no modeler. But I'll put the question to them and see what they come up with.
It's really expensive, so
Okay.
it's useful to know if it makes a significant difference or not.
Yeah.
Yes.
Leave it with me, Travis. I'll get back to you. Yeah.
Can I add to this? I've always been badgering the coastal monitoring for doing more 3D surveys, and I'm glad that Dan in our area has been sort of fully embracing that. But when it comes to talking to people and showing them how the subtidal area in front of the spit has actually moved back, is a lot more explicit in a profile than in the surface digital elevation profile. So, but having the full surface allows you to do a few more profiles, or a profile here and a profile there. And I think that is the benefit. It provides a good option, sampling the entire area for profiles.
Yeah, I think what. Yeah, sorry, it was just sparked my thoughts going in my head now. So what's really interesting about Hurst Spit is it is really deep water very quickly in front of the barrier. If you look at other barrier beaches like Porlock or Blakeney, they've got a lot more shallow water, a lot more early kind of, and I think that makes Hurst Spit a really unique and interesting barrier beach to understand how it will evolve in the future. And that like subtidal movement that Uwe was talking about has been like critical for us engaging with stakeholders to understand that this barrier is moving back no matter what we do. It's that we've got to work with those barrier rollback processes. So returning to the question, can I quantify it? No. Can I qualitatively say how valuable it is? I could probably write some very nice language to say that.
Yes,
just to comment for Alec on the 2 million cube, actually doesn't sound an awful lot to me. I worked at Bournemouth, and then with all the replenishments, we were losing about 70,000 cube a year, which we assumed was arriving at Hindisbury Head and then going around Christchurch. Now, when BCP Council came into existence, just for a short while, I was over in Christchurch, and there was no evidence of that material arriving in Christchurch. So we assumed that it must be going offshore at Hindisbury Head and short circuiting out to the bank or sand, I can't remember which it is. So the standard model you might have expected was that the drift was going around Christchurch Bay, arriving at Hurst Spit, and then going out through the Narrows onto Shingles Bank and the Dalton Sand, which are probably not volume of, I don't know, 50 million cube according to this. So it's just conceivable you could actually lose 2 million very, very quickly.
I think a couple of things then on there is longshore transport rates at Hurst Spit are known. So 10,000, 15,000, 20,000 metres cubed per year. And so that within the context of 2 million metres cubed, sets a bit of that. But also how barrier beaches respond to storm events is, they don't erode like a beach in front of a seawall would erode and under the material that's taken off. They overwash and they roll back and you get deposition of sediment in the back barrier environment. That's not sediment lost from the system, it's sediment in the back of the system now. And so actually through those rollback processes, you're going to start to see the barrier become more slosh aligned. It's going to start to be more stable. So how is it going to actually lose 2 million metres cubed over a relatively short geomorphological time period. But this is none of this is certain, it's all uncertain, and that's why we were kind of gone down the adaptation pathways route for Hurst Spit. Is we'll make a decision today, we monitor it, we'll make the right next decision when we've got the data, when the conditions allow us. But we have set that strategic long-term direction.
And the fundamental difference is that Bournemouth is sand and Hurst is gravel. So you can't use sand somewhere and like gravel or it's different.
We're the victim of our own propaganda because we don't have to find the sand.
No, not defined
Yes, and it sounds sandbags at all. It is a mixed beach because the material coming over the cliffs always was mixed. And one of the things we were finding, we were very, very fortunate that in 1974, when we were able to start our own monitoring, we were doing quite precise from the very beginning. And Bournemouth Beach has become finer over time. And I had a real challenge right at the end that I wanted to make the replenishments coarser and coarser in order to turn back that fining process. But by the time you get to Hengistbury Head, it's actually a very coarse shore indeed. Not quite as coarse as Hurst Spit. And in fact, when we plot the PSD right around the two bays, it seems to be much more linked, which makes you think there must have been a connection between the two bays in the past. And whether the Hengistbury Head long ride has diverted material offshore, I don't know. It was up in the air. We couldn't put a finger on what was happening.
Any other questions? No, everyone wants lunch, I think. If we could just thank our speakers. So it looks like the food, plenty of food, is up the back. And we've got till 2 o'clock. So if we could be back in our seats at 2 o'clock, it'd be much appreciated. Thank you. Okay, welcome back. I think you've all had a good lunch as we go into the afternoon session. So we're going to hear from Alec Dane. He's going to be talking about, from the University of Southampton, who's going to be talking about monitoring and investigating underwater cultural heritage sites. And then Jason Sadler from Geodata Institute in improving coastal resilience. And Simon Williams from the National Oceanography Centre, who will be talking about from satellite to shoreline. So if I can ask Alex to
move. Good afternoon, I'm Jason Sadler, and before I take any credit or blame for this project, I should mention that it's a team effort between a couple of my team at the Geodata Institute and Charlie and Thomas and everyone at CCO. So Geodata, myself and team do the data management and website for the CCO, as you probably have guessed already. And the potential for using machine learning to predict future waves based on historic waves was identified in a previous meeting to discuss ideas. And I was lucky to win some sort of pump priming funding from the university to fund a kind of a quite sort of limited, small initial proof of concept. And that's what we'll talk about. So I feel like I can't promise the world, there's great expectation, but we've hopefully shown something with some promise. Good. Okay, so as you know, there are 38 directional wave rider buoys in the network. And we're investigating the potential to use machine learning techniques, so fairly established ideas and tools. We're not kind of reinventing the wheel at the moment. And the idea is that, as you know, there are some existing predictions available. I think Uwe mentioned on the CPAS website, but they're kind of some limitations. So they lack some precision because they don't take into account sort of shallow water effects. They're gridded outputs. They're not necessarily near where you need to measure things or predict them. So we've established that you can use historic data plus available predictive data from ERF5 or OpenMeteo in order to build a model that can predict maybe 48 hours, maybe even 7 days ahead, what the waves are going to look like. Potentially other variables as well. So this schematic sort of shows the process that we've undertaken. So we've been using OpenMeteo, and I'll come back to the choice of that in a minute. OpenMeteo has something like 40 or 50 different meteorological predictions, some going quite a long way ahead, and they're kind of gridded over pretty much the whole area of the UK. And then we've got years and years, decades worth of historic buoy data that can be used to feed into we've used XGBoost, but I'll come back to that as well, which is an open source machine learning model. Then there can be an optimization stage using actual wave data so that you can measure and improve the model that's produced. And then you can start using it to predict waves and check the validity and accuracy of those predictions without any actual wave data until time has passed and you can compare it. So in theory, you can build a model that can produce predictions for waves with some degree of accuracy going into the future. So in the early stages of the project, when we first built the model, first of all, we realized that ERF5 wasn't suitable. So we'd be looking initially around Milford, and ERF5 is too shallow, so there's no nearby data available to feed into a model. But then we discovered this thing called OpenMeteo. So it's open source, open data, and has lots of different meteorological variables. And when you are building the model, you can feed them all in, and it will tell you which are significant in predicting wave heights for your 20 years worth of sample data. So as you can see, wind speed and wind components, east, west, north, south wind components in various directions are the available parameters, and they go into the model that's produced, into XGBoost, and they allow us to build a model that can predict initially wave height, significant wave height. So here's an example, and as Thomas mentioned earlier on, you do have a physical model that's used around for predicting the future of Milford. So we chose Milford so we could compare physical with the machine learning model. So this was around the 10th to the 16th of September. And as you can see, the purple is the machine learning one, and the blue is the physical model that has been purchased for Milford. So, and here is 7 stormy days around the 12th to 19th of September. So the green is actual significant wave height, blue, the physical model, and purple, the machine learning model. And we produced hundreds and hundreds of these charts, so it's quite easy to sort of cherry pick good ones, but most of them are pretty good. And obviously, being good scientists, we used methods to pull out statistical measures of how well the model performs over hundreds of sort of random sample times. So it's comparable to the physical model, not necessarily quite as good yet, I think, when we did these measures, but it's not too far off. Since the initial work, I think we had about 18 to 20 days of funding, and we probably spent more like sort of 60 days because everyone was just so excited about it, and we just couldn't help ourselves. So we just haven't stopped working on it, hoping we're going to get some big funding in the future. With mixed success so far. But we've since been working on wave direction, wave mean period, peak period. So we've actually, in the last week or so, produced, added to the model additionally to HS, and you can see that we've been able to predict, use this machine learning to predict going forward up to 7 days those parameters as well. So we probably need to do some more work to see how real those predictions end up being. That should say exceedance metrics. So after our early results, Thomas suggested looking at how, not necessarily statistical measures, but how good the machine learning predictions are at predicting the top 1, 5, 10 percentiles of the highest waves over a period of time or over a random date. And you've got this sort of trade-off where you can make some really good hits and you can predict the highest waves, but if you try to predict the highest wave too well, you're going to end up predicting high waves that didn't actually happen. So your use of this tool in a sort of operational sense needs to be sort of quite carefully thought through. So I won't go through the detail, but there's some statistics there that we pulled out. So earlier on, we tried lots of different machine learning models, and the kind of Python scripting that you can use makes it very easy to just, try swap in and out dozens of different models or do ensemble models of different ones. And there are, I think we originally looked at this one called LSTM that's been used a fair amount in sort of oceanographic circles. I think we found this one called XGBoost could do pretty much the same as all, they were pretty much performed, but the XGBoost could produce a model that just runs in 10 seconds and does pretty much as well as the physical model that takes 30 to 40 minutes to run using HPC, dozens of cores, huge amounts of memory. So it's not, I'm not going to say it's better than physical models, but it is certainly quicker and cheaper. And then those are sort of very early days proof of concept. So there's lots of areas. So in fact, when we looked at the first results, again, I won't go through all of this, but you could see sort of various biases in the data when you just looked at the charts. So the model sort of mapping reality, but maybe sort of out of phase or drifting towards sort of climatological means and various different discontinuities, lagged features, and various ways that we could improve them, thinking through a sort of a second and, maybe with more funding, further work. But we did improve on the initial findings by taking on some of these problems and actually did manage to improve the first results. So I'm just going to switch to, whoops, that wasn't supposed to happen. Let's go back. Let's just show. So this morning, just for fun, we loaded today's data to Milford into our sort of test system, and we ran the machine learning models. So this is Milford today. We've got real data up until about 11 o'clock this morning, and it's not showing much in the way of time on the x-axis because we've shown 7 days ahead. So I don't know if you can go to a betting shop and put some money on the size of waves that there's going to be on the 14th and the 18th. But the physical model's predicting significant wave height there. And because the Open Meteo is obviously predicting the driving winds in X days and Y days time, it's predicting bigger waves then. So I invite everyone to go back to the Milford page, remember what that looks like and see what the wind looks like in 3 and 7 days time. See if we can go back to the good. So we've done quite a lot of work at the sort of proof of concept stage, way more than we should have done. We've already started putting in some funding applications because it shows promise and it shows great potential real world impact if it can be made to work on at scale and in in real life environments, potential to improve sort of operational practices, say obviously responding to storm events, but timing of maintenance and things like that. So with luckily some funding, we'd like to scale it up and make it available live on the website for all locations. Be really good to expand into lots of different other parameters. So, you know, it's all we're doing is throwing data into a machine learning model with some external data. So why couldn't you predict other things as well? So the hope is to get some funding, and you know, the vision for the future is a digital twin of the coast where you can, you know, have a version of the coast and every single prediction and you know, measured reality, and use that as your sort of experimentation body. There you go. Anyone wonders the difference between AI and machine learning? I've included an extra couple of slides, but I won't show those unless that's of interest.
Good afternoon, everyone. Sorry I'm not there in person. My name is Simon Williams. I'm in the Coastal Ocean Group, the National Oceanography Centre in Liverpool. And I am going to talk about a novel way of measuring tides and waves using GNSS. So I know you're probably all fully aware that it's costly to deploy and maintain instruments in the sea, biofouling being an obvious consequence amongst others. If we also, in addition, if we have anything overhanging the water, we can be subject to various issues such as damage from the vessels, like the picture on the right, where these two radar arms were hit by a ship coming into port, or subject to floating debris, such as the plot on the left, where that big buoy thing, often when it's not secured, would float underneath the tide gauge radar, causing issues. So what if we had a complementary, an alternative and relatively cost system that was land-based so it didn't suffer from these issues, such as here, where we got an instrument 269 meters above sea level, or here on the left, an instrument in Antarctica, or even along the River Danube, an instrument on top of a building here in Budapest, or here in the Caribbean overlooking a bay in St. Bartholomew, or even closer to home, that site in Liverpool, in Littlehampton, Port Isaac and Portland Bill. So there is a way, and it's involving global navigation satellite systems. The technique is called GNSS interferometric reflectometry, and it is reasonably low cost compared to conventional systems, but it does not replace them, but only complement them. So how does it work? Or does it work? So I'll jump to this first before I go on to explain how it works. Does it work? Yes, we've got probably 378 or more sites around the world that can measure water levels using GNSS-IR. And if you want to see these sites, you can go to the GNSS-IR portal we have on the Permanent Service for Mean Sea Level website. So how does it work? Well, what it does is it makes use of probably one of the worst error sources for positioning for GNSS satellites, and that is called multipath, where signals, rather than coming direct to the antenna, are reflected off or refracted through or scattered from various objects. Anything in the nearby area will cause multipath, and those two signals will then interact with each other and cause noise in the positioning. Now, ever since multipath was known for GNSS positioning, people have been trying to model it, to remove it, or to understand it. One of the simplest models is for a reflecting surface, a horizontally flat reflecting surface beneath the antenna. So what happens is you get a direct signal coming to there, and then a reflected signal off the surface Now that reflected signal has travelled a further distance from the direct signal, and therefore the two signals are potentially out of phase with each other. So if we imagine two signals coming in and they're in phase or out of phase with each other, they will increase the amount of signal noise in there, or they will cancel each other, so you've got no signal noise. So you can go from a high signal to noise ratio to a low one as the signals change with the distance of the reflected signal. So for this simple model, the reflected signal distance is merely a combination of the elevation angle of the satellite to the antenna, the distance from the antenna to the water surface, and the wavelength of the signal. So if you imagine in this case, if the satellite was directly overhead, then the actual distance traveled would be 2h down to the water surface and back up. So looking at our model again, that frequency we get, and it depends if everything else is flat, if this water level isn't changing, everything else is the same. The only thing that's changing is the elevation angle. So the distance changing will be with a relation to that elevation angle. The frequency and the interference pattern will depend on the height above the antenna. So for a low height, say around 2 meters, you'll get a relatively long period signal. As that reflector height increases, you'll get an increasingly higher frequency signal. So the plot on the right is SNR data from a GPS GNSS system. This is a Galileo signal. As the satellite passes over the site, and you can see on both the rising and falling signals, you get a really good periodic signal, and these are related to that reflector height. We don't get them very much at high elevation angles because the gain pattern of the antenna and the type of the antenna stops that, forces that multipath to reduce. So if we took one of those, like the one on the left, we convert it to a periodogram, a Lomsgargle periodogram, we'll get a peak, and that peak is then related to the height of the water below the antenna. So if we do this for all the satellites that pass over a site where the reflections are coming off the water, we can then estimate the reflector height, and we get a time series of water level. We've now got a tide gauge. Now, these are not necessarily point measurements. They have an aerial extent of which those reflections are coming from the water. They depend. These are three. So these aerial extents are based on what are called Fresnel zones. The ones on here show the Fresnel zones for these sites. Yellow is 5 degrees elevation, blue is 10 degrees elevation, and red is 15 degrees elevation, the sort of elevations you're going to look over. So your area of measurements are sort of in that sort of zone. Now, as the site gets higher, those Fresnel zones increase. So you're looking over a wider area as your antenna gets much higher above the water level. Here's an example close to home for us. This is Nels Point in Barry, South Wales. It is a site we installed for a calibration against the SWAT satellite altimeter. So it was a very cheap system. You can see it was installed in the building on the right there, which is the National Coast Watch building, and has the sort of extent you see by those white Fresnel zones. These are the results from that site. So on the left is just the reflector height as a function of time over a few weeks. On the right there, we have the results in form of daily observations. The top plot is the GNSS-IR results. The middle plot is from nearby tide gauge at Newport. It's not exactly at it. And the bottom plot is the difference between the two. Now you can see there are differences, but then that's to be expected because they're not co-located. So we get a reasonably good comparison between these. If we look at one of the plots that we saw earlier with the Fresnel zones, this is at Grand Pier in Western Supermare, another one we put in for the swapped calibration. Now, the orange line is the nearby tide gauge at Hinkley Point. Now we can see in this case, at low tides, actually the area around the pier dries out. So what we're getting is reflections not off the water, but off the beach there. So if we actually isolate those observations, we can get measurements of beach level. So the top plot here is the measurement of the beach level for points. I haven't completely QC'd this, but we can see that we get reflector heights that vary a little bit over the range of azimuths that we're measuring the reflector height. And if we take those and we segment them into 30-degree segments and plot the changes in reflector height for those segments, we get the bottom plot showing that we are measuring changes in the beach heights as a function of time. So we can, let alone using it as a water level gauge, we can use it to measure beach heights. So one more thing is that what you notice here, so on the left, we have two examples of the signal to noise ratio. This is for the same site, the same satellite, so it's passing over the same point and the same frequency. One was on May the 10th, and the other was 3 days later on May the 13th. And the plots on the right are the wavelet equivalents of the signal to noise ratio. So just to show this in a different light, so we see that we have a big signal in the range of reflector heights that we would expect, and that signal gets smaller as the elevation angle increases. What we can really see though on the plot on the left, this was measured as said on 10th of May, and it had at that point the significant wave height was around 50 centimeters. The next on the 13th, the significant wave height increased it to 1.6 meters. And when you see there's a big drop off in where we're seeing the signal, we see the signal for the top plot over the whole 10 degrees elevations, possibly up to 15 or 16 degrees, whereas for the bottom one, we are only seeing a signal up to around 6 degrees angle of elevation. So if we can take those values and somehow we can convert them to significant wave height. So we're now measuring significant wave height with the system. So here's an example. This is for, again, Nell's Point. So the top plot is around a year and a bit of the GNSS-IR results converted to significant wave height. And the orange is on the model of nearest point of the model to the GPS site. We get a really good correlation between the two. If we look a little closer, at first I thought while it was given a good job, it wasn't doing great. So you can see on the bottom left there that the blue is the reflectometry results and the orange is the model. And we can see some scattering between the two, especially in terms of the GNSS-IR is producing some periodic variations. If we look at the plot on the right, this is the GNSS-IR compared to the Western Bay wavebuoy, which is in the area but is on the other side of the estuary. So we couldn't expect a good comparison, but both of those indeed show that there is a periodic variation. So we're confident that what we're seeing is that we do see a periodic variation in the significant wave height from the GNSS-IR that is real. and it's the model that's not capturing that signal. It turns out that the actual peak in significant wave height occurs around 1 hour before high tide at the site. So one more example. This is Portlandville. So the site there, the GNSS antenna is on the building there overlooking the water at Portlandville. This site was not intended for doing this. It was just there. It's an ordnance survey site for positioning, but it has a good footprint over the actual bay there. And the plot on the bottom is a year of, or nearly a year of significant wave height at Portlandville compared to the wave buoy at Chesil Beach. So again, we've seen a really good comparison between the two. And we have done this at quite a few sites now in various locations. All of them are giving really good results. So what are the take-home messages? So for water levels, the negatives are that in some way we do have a trade-off between water levels and significant wave height in a place. Places where the significant wave height is really always quite big. We have some sites in the southern North Sea where they're on platforms. You don't measure water level so well there because you're measuring, getting significant wave height is affecting that. It doesn't work in noisy environments such as marinas or where there's boat traffic, or if there's buildings or topography that blocks the signals at low angles. Marinas, you're likely to get a lot of reflections off the boats in the way, or you might get boats that come close to the antenna and therefore block the signals. You do need to have water visibility, but you do have this ability to put the GNSS tide gauges in locations where you wouldn't be able to put a normal tide gauge. So the other big positive of this is the tide gauge is completely defined in a global reference frame. We know the height of the antenna relative to the ellipsoid and therefore ITRF 20, one of the reference frames. That's a great thing because it means it's a self-leveling in the effect that we actually get the heights relative to a global system rather than local datums. It has no moving parts, so it's good in frozen or salty locations. Of course, it doesn't suffer things like biofouling or being attacked, knocked by ships. So it can be a niche tide gauge for certain regions. For example, that one in Antarctica that was built specifically to measure water level there. And it can potentially be far from shore as long as there's still a visibility of the water. And you can use cheap GNSS sensors. We have ones we had installed in the Severn Estuary, cost less than £500, and can also measure significant wave height. For the wave height, it's not as simple as measuring water level. We wouldn't get the same number of sites that we have already, that we have measuring water level, those 378. It really needs to have clean elevation and azimuth views, no clutters. So the best sites are those that don't have that effect. It needs a large azimuthal range to get as many measurements as you can. It also needs all GNSS systems and frequencies to increase the number of measurements you get per day. You need high rate data. It doesn't work when you're only measuring every 30 seconds or so. And it needs elevation angles down to at least 2 degrees. But in the case of significant wave height and water level, low-cost units are just as good as the geodetic quality receivers. The ones that we showed in the plot, the 370 sites, all of them were geodetic quality receivers installed not for measuring water level. A question that you'll probably get is, can it measure wave period? No, because we're measuring over every time a satellite goes over there, the time the satellite takes to go over the location is around 20 minutes. So you're not going to be measuring wave period. Can it measure wave direction? Possibly. there are some indications that yes, it can do it, but I think it's a lot harder, significantly a lot harder than measuring just a significant wave height. Does it need calibration? It does currently, but some of the ways we measure, there's a direct linkage due to certain models that actually directly link the that parameter to wave height. So once we've tested it on enough sites, we could be sure that we don't need, or minimal calibration is needed. And I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Okay, we now do some questions. Jason, if you'd like to come and join on stage. Yeah. Okay, right. Okay, well, we got some for you straight away. Come in on the chat. Hi, Jason. Have you seen improvement to R2 and the wave data going into the model increases, i.e., over time? That's from Tim Hunt. Can I read that?
R squared, yeah. So I think we just gradually tweaked the model and run it over longer periods in order to try and optimize R squared. Probably the very detail is beyond my personal knowledge. One of my colleagues will tell you how many years of data we trained the model on. Do you remember, Thomas? So I think for Milford, we've basically got 20 years of data.
That's right. It's 96. So we have close to 30 years of data. So if you use all the training data, you probably use about 28, 29 years.
But then we're combining it with predictions and wind values from Open Meteo, which probably, I'm not quite sure how far back they go. So probably limited by that. Might have to get back to you on a detailed response to that. But we did a lot of work to try and improve the models, and we were able to improve the sort of R squared and other statistical measures quite significantly.
Okay, and then we've got another one from Roger Quinn. Did you find Waveboy data quality affected the performance? And 2, did you investigate the sensitivity of the training data, duration, etc.?
We used QC data, so the model probably would have been impacted by quality if it was very dirty. When you say the performance, I suppose you just mean the quality of the output. So I think using QC data probably removed sort of obvious rubbish, or all rubbish, I'm sure, given the QC measures that they have. And we spent weeks sort of playing around with the sensitivity and how the training worked, and just trying lots of different things. So in some ways, I suppose we just sort of kept turning the handle fairly, blindly until we got the results that we liked the look of, and then we kind of gradually worked out what we were doing and what was working well, and started to understand the problems. So I probably haven't answered those questions perfectly, but I think I might go away and come back with a response that makes more sense to someone who knows what they're talking about.
Uwe.
Two-part question. So obviously, as you go forwards in time, your prediction more and more depends on how good the wind forecast is. So there's no point in sort of trying to go with that. Have you tried hindcasting, i.e. using measured wind? So that's question A. Question AC1 is we don't have, Milford doesn't have much of a tide range, but obviously most other locations have a tide range. So you don't have water level in there. Would it not be useful to feed water level as well?
Probably. So when you refer to hindcasting, the Open Meteo has observations going back, can't remember how many years, but it also has the predictions that it made at different points. So a lot of our training and sort of measuring was looking at how those predictions worked, going back when they were predictions and comparing them to the reality. So, and the predictions go 16 days ahead. So it'd be quite interesting to see whether it can, obviously the confidence will be lower, but it'd be interesting to see whether it can produce anything useful that, you know, very far ahead. We focused on sort of 48 hours and then put 7 days in kind of for fun. I answered the second part of the question. I think I did. Can't remember what it was though.
Any other questions?
If there's time, maybe no objections, could you go over the difference between AI and machine learning?
Yes, I think they're probably a bit too wordy, but AI, you know, the idea of aiming for general intelligence, general understanding of a problem area without a, you know, a specifically written model like large language models. Whereas machine learning is a statistical learning algorithm that gets past. Still got the presentation open.
It should be able to open it from
yeah. I'll put this up so you can read. There's 2 slides here. Let's see if that one's easiest. So machine learning is a subset of AI really, and it's referring to learning statistical patterns in data, measuring predictions against actual, and then training a model to do that again in the future. Whereas I suppose AI, obviously we have to use AI in our funding applications because it's buzzword at the moment, and it points to this idea of general intelligence that can figure things out where there's no sort of identified model. That's useful.
Any other questions? I think that's it.
Oh, good.
Thank you very
Get your bets on those waves.
Okay, so that draws the day pretty much to a close. Yeah, I've made a few notes as the sort of day has progressed, and right back from this morning when Thomas was talking about the program update, and it was really good to hear about the investment that's going in with the new laser scanner with Worthing and the drone at Canterbury. Did I sense a bit of competition there? Possibly. But I think more importantly, it was the OBC going forward and that will be submitted to LPRG. I think that is securing the funding for the future. So I think that's very good to hear. We heard about assets. You know, time and time again, we're asked about, do we really know the condition and where our assets are? I think we can say with some confidence now that we're getting there. The website, always good to hear about the website. The wealth of data that's on there, and but really encouraged by the amount of people that are actually looking and using that data. The figures were really quite interesting. And then talking about how we actually use this data that we talk about in producing our beach management plans and actually maintaining our beaches on the ground. Really good to hear about that. And then really good to hear from Uwe, who's actually using data on the ground, collecting data on the ground, whether from the programme or from elsewhere, and seeing how coastal erosion and how it affects and how it can go towards coastal retreat. We always talk about the data, the modelling data that we use for schemes, you know, capital investment, building things, But it was interesting to hear about actually using that data for less management at Hurst, which was really quite interesting. And then the underwater heritage sites, about how they use in their words, was this high quality coastal monitoring data for their wrecks, the sediment data for the wreck sites. So that was really good to hear. But I think one thing we should really take from Jason is the excitement we should have with this data that can turn 20 days of funding into 60. But it's a lesson learned. But there's been some absolutely fantastic presentations today, clearly demonstrating how valuable this programme is, and to us all. And we need to make sure we continue to support that into the future. That's it from me. All I want to say now is thank you to all our speakers today. It's been absolutely first class. I want to say thank you to Thomas and Poppy for putting the day together. I think everyone's certainly going to be going away with a lot of information in their heads. And to you for attending, and the people online, because without you, it's not really an event. So thanks for attending, everyone, and I wish you a safe journey home.